Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into some absolutely wild stories while we keep things chill with some Minecraft parkour in the background. I hope you're comfortable because we're about to unpack some serious drama that'll have you questioning how people sleep at night after pulling moves like this. So, our story begins on a rainy night when someone made a choice that seemed harmless at the time. They had no idea that accepting help from a stranger would pull them into a world of sealed packages, strange coordinates, and deliveries that should have raised every red flag imaginable. Before we get started, I just want to give a huge shout out to everyone who's been showing up, commenting, and supporting the channel. Truly, thank you. Your energy is what keeps this community alive. And now, let's dive in. Late one rainy night, I missed my bus. I know how that sounds, like the beginning of every bad decision story you've ever heard, but I'm standing there at the stop, soaked through my jacket, phone at 4% battery, and the next bus isn't coming for another hour. That's when Margaret pulled up. She had this kind face, the type that reminds you of someone's grandma, and she rolled down her window asking if I needed a ride. I hesitated for maybe 3 seconds before the rain made the decision for me. I got in. The drive started normal enough. We made small talk about the weather, about how the city's public transit system was a joke, about how she'd lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. Then, almost casually, she mentioned she could use some help with deliveries. Said she ran a small courier service, nothing fancy, just packages that needed dropping off at odd hours. The pay was cash, $200 per delivery, and she needed someone reliable. I was 3 weeks behind on rent. My landlord had already slipped the final notice under my door. So when she asked if I was interested, I said yes before my brain could catch up with my mouth. The first delivery happened 2 nights later. Margaret texted me an address and told me to meet her in a grocery store parking lot at 11 p.m. She handed me a sealed manila envelope, thick but not heavy, and gave me the drop-off location, an abandoned lot near the industrial district. I was supposed to leave it under a specific dumpster and text her when it was done. The whole thing took 15 minutes. When I got back to my car, there was a notification on my phone. $200 deposited into my account through some app I'd never heard of. I told myself it was probably just weird rich people stuff. Maybe legal documents that needed to stay off the books. Maybe someone's embarrassing medical records. I didn't ask questions because I didn't want to know the answers. Over the next few weeks, the deliveries kept coming. Always at night, always to strange locations, back alleys behind closed restaurants, storage units in facilities that looked like they hadn't seen a tenant in years. Once to a motel parking lot where I had to slide the package under the door of room 12 without knocking. The envelopes were always sealed. I never opened them. I just took the money and tried not to think too hard about what I was doing. Rent got paid. I bought groceries without checking my bank account first. It felt like I'd finally caught a break. Then one night I recognized an address. It took me a second to place it because Margaret usually sent coordinates, not street numbers, but when I pulled up, I realized I was parked outside my own apartment building. My stomach dropped. The package was addressed to apartment 7C, my neighbor. The guy who'd lived there for years, always kept to himself, never caused problems, except he disappeared about 2 weeks ago, just gone one day. I'd noticed because his mail was piling up and his car hadn't moved. I stood there in the hallway holding this package, my hands shaking, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn around and leave. But I didn't. I slipped it under his door like I'd done with every other delivery, texted Margaret that it was done, and went back to my apartment. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what could possibly be in that envelope and why it was being delivered to someone who wasn't even there anymore. That's when I checked my delivery bag, the one Margaret had given me to keep everything organized. Inside, tucked into a side pocket I never used, I found a burner phone. It was already on. There was one message, coordinates to a location I didn't recognize, and a single line of text. You're in now. No backing out. If you've made it this far into the chaos, you're as addicted to Reddit drama as I am. Make sure to subscribe and tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Now, you're probably wondering what happened when I opened that package. I didn't open it, but I did something arguably stupider. I turned on that burner phone and started scrolling through the messages. There were dozens of threads, all using code names instead of real names. Coordinates, dates, amounts of money, and photos. God, the photos. People in compromising positions, documents that looked financial, screenshots of conversations that would ruin careers. This wasn't a courier service. This was a blackmail operation. Margaret and whoever else was involved were delivering evidence packages and hush money to keep people quiet, and I'd been their unknowing accomplice for weeks. I spent that entire night trying to figure out what to do. Every option felt like a trap. If I went to the police, I was admitting I'd been part of this, even if I didn't know what it was. If I confronted Margaret, she had my information, my address, probably my entire life documented somewhere. If I just stopped showing up, well, that message made it pretty clear that wasn't an option. I felt like I was drowning. Then I thought about my neighbor in 7C, about how he'd just vanished, about how nobody had reported him missing because people like us, we kept to ourselves. We didn't have family checking in. We were easy to erase. That's when everything unraveled. I decided the only way out was through. I called a non-emergency police line, explained I had information about an ongoing criminal operation, and asked to speak to someone in organized crime. They connected me with a detective who sounded skeptical until I started listing addresses and dates. He told me to come in immediately. I brought the burner phone, showed him everything, and told him about Margaret. The detective made some calls. 2 hours later, I was sitting in an interview room with federal agents. Apparently, Margaret's operation had been on their radar for months, but they couldn't get close enough to make arrests. They needed someone on the inside, so I became that someone. They fitted me with a wire so thin I couldn't even feel it and sent me to my next pickup. Margaret handed me another package, same routine as always, but this time every word she said was being recorded. She mentioned names, locations, even laughed about how easy it was to find people desperate enough not to ask questions. I wanted to punch her. Instead, I smiled and took the package. The agents followed me to the drop-off, watched the pickup happen, and traced it back to a whole network of people. Lawyers, business people, even a city councilman, all of them paying or being paid to keep secrets buried. The arrests happened fast. Margaret was picked up at her house the next morning. They found hard drives full of evidence, burner phones, ledgers documenting years of payoffs. 12 people total were arrested. The news called it one of the largest blackmail rings the city had seen in decades. I had to give statements, testify in a closed hearing. They offered me immunity in exchange for cooperation, which was good because I definitely could have been charged as an accessory. My neighbor in 7C turned up alive, thankfully. He'd gone into hiding after refusing to pay, terrified they'd follow through on their threats. He came back after the arrests. But here's the thing nobody tells you about being a witness in something like this. It doesn't just end. I moved apartments because I couldn't stand living in that building anymore. Couldn't walk past 7C without feeling sick. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media, and still I get calls sometimes, always from blocked numbers. I answer and there's just breathing on the other end. No words, just someone letting me know they're still out there. The detectives say it's probably nothing, just intimidation tactics from people who can't actually do anything now. But I don't sleep well anymore. I check my locks 3 times before bed. I don't accept rides from strangers, obviously, and I definitely don't take jobs that pay cash and don't ask questions. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just said no that first night, if I'd stood in the rain and waited for the next bus, if I'd been less desperate or more suspicious. But I didn't. I got in the car. I took the money. And I ended up part of something so much darker than I could have imagined. The worst part is knowing how easy it was. How many people like me are out there right now, making deliveries, asking no questions, just trying to pay rent. How many of them have already found the burner phone and decided it's easier to just keep going. I got out. But I think about the ones who don't. I think about them a lot. But while I was dealing with mysterious strangers, someone else was facing betrayal from someone they saw every single day at work. I thought Dana and I had a pretty normal working relationship. We weren't best friends or anything, but we were civil, professional, maybe even friendly on good days. We'd grab coffee sometimes, complain about management, the usual co-worker stuff. So when we both ended up competing for the same senior position, I figured it would stay that way. Professional. Maybe a little competitive, sure, but nothing toxic. I genuinely thought we could both handle it like adults. I was so incredibly wrong. It started on a Monday morning. I walked into the office around 8:30, grabbed my usual terrible coffee from the break room, and settled in at my desk. I was maybe 10 minutes into checking emails when I got a Slack message from HR asking me to come down immediately. No context, no explanation, just, please come to conference room B as soon as possible. My stomach dropped instantly because that's never a good sign. You don't get mysterious, urgent HR summons for good news. I walked down there trying to think of what I could have possibly done wrong. Maybe I'd missed a deadline? Forgot to file some paperwork? The worst case scenarios were already spinning in my head, but nothing could have prepared me for what actually happened. I sat down across from Linda, our HR director, and another guy I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as someone from corporate legal. That's when I knew this was bad. Linda slid a folder across the table and asked if I recognized the emails inside. I opened it and started reading. They were emails sent from my company account to several of our biggest clients. Hostile, unprofessional, borderline threatening emails. One of them called a client an idiot. Another shared confidential project details with what looked like a competitor's email address. I felt like I was reading someone else's nightmare. I looked up at them completely stunned and said, I didn't write any of this. I'd never seen these emails before in my life. Linda's expression didn't change. She said the emails had been sent from my account, from my computer, during work hours. They had timestamps, IP logs, everything. I was being suspended effective immediately pending a full investigation. I tried to explain that this didn't make any sense, that someone must have accessed my account, but I could see in their faces they'd already made up their minds. I was walked out of the building like a criminal. My keycard was deactivated. My desk would be packed up and sent to me. It was humiliating. I sat in my car in the parking lot for probably 20 minutes just trying to process what had happened. And then it hit me. Dana. She used to work in IT before transferring to our department about 2 years ago. She still helped out sometimes when the IT team was swamped. She had access, she knew systems, and we were both going for the same promotion. This feels like a deleted scene from a sitcom, except it's real and my entire career was on the line. I went home and immediately started going through everything I could think of. I checked my sent folder, my login history, anything that might prove I wasn't losing my mind. The emails weren't in my sent folder, which was weird. If they'd actually been sent from my account through normal means, they should have been there. That was the first crack in their story. I took screenshots of everything. Then I did something I probably should have done months ago. I hired a digital forensics expert. I know that sounds dramatic, but I was facing termination and possibly legal action for something I didn't do. I needed proof, real technical proof that would hold up. I found a guy named Martin who specialized in corporate fraud cases. I sent him everything I had access to and explained the situation. It took him about a week, but what he found was absolutely damning. The emails had been sent from an IP address that didn't match my home network or the office network. It matched Dana's home IP address. The metadata showed the emails were created and sent after hours between 9 and 11 p.m., on nights when I had provable alibis. One of them was sent on a Thursday night when I was at a work event that Dana had also attended until about 8:30. I had photos, check-in posts, witnesses. There was no possible way I could have sent that email, but that wasn't even the worst part. Martin also recovered deleted Slack messages that Dana thought were gone forever. She'd been chatting with another coworker, someone named Brett from accounting who I barely knew. In the messages, Dana explicitly talked about clearing the competition and making sure I was out of the running. She joked about how easy it was to spoof an email account when you know what you're doing. Brett had even replied with laughing emojis and said something like, "You're cold, I love it." I sat there reading these messages feeling absolutely sick. This wasn't just competitive ambition or office politics. This was premeditated sabotage. She'd planned this. She'd created fake evidence, framed me for professional misconduct, and torpedoed my career because she wanted a promotion. The audacity was breathtaking. I compiled everything into a folder. The forensic report, the IP logs, the metadata analysis, screenshots of the Slack messages, my alibis with supporting evidence, everything. I didn't go back to HR first. I went straight to corporate legal, with copies for both them and HR. I also quietly consulted with an employment attorney, just in case I needed to protect myself further down the line. The meeting was scheduled for that Friday. I walked in with my lawyer, which I think surprised them, and laid out every single piece of evidence. The forensic report alone was pretty damning, but the Slack messages were the smoking gun. Dana had literally confessed to the entire scheme in writing. I watched Linda's face go from skeptical to horrified as she read through everything. The corporate legal guy was already on his phone, presumably calling someone higher up. They asked me to wait outside while they discussed next steps. I sat in the hallway for maybe 30 minutes. My lawyer kept reassuring me that we had an airtight case, but I was still terrified they'd find some way to spin this back on me. Finally, Linda came out and asked me to come back in. She apologized. Actually apologized. She said they'd be launching an immediate internal investigation, that my suspension was lifted effective immediately, and that I'd receive back pay for the time I was out. She couldn't discuss personnel actions regarding Dana, but she assured me the situation was being handled at the highest level. I found out later through the office grapevine what happened next. Dana was called in that same afternoon. She was confronted with all the evidence I'd provided. Apparently, she tried to deny it at first, then tried to claim it was just a joke that got out of hand, then finally broke down and admitted everything. She was terminated immediately. Security walked her out. Her company laptop and phone were confiscated for further investigation. And here's where it gets absurd. Because Dana hadn't just committed an ethical violation or broken company policy, she'd actually committed several crimes: computer fraud, identity theft, corporate sabotage. The company decided to press charges. They had to, really, because if this got out and they'd done nothing, it would have opened them up to all kinds of liability. Dana was looking at criminal charges in addition to losing her job. Imagine being this confidently wrong that you commit multiple felonies over a job promotion. Brett from accounting was also fired, by the way. He'd been complicit, encouraged the scheme, and hadn't reported it. The company took a scorched earth approach to the whole thing. As for me, I got the promotion about a month later. They expedited the process, probably because they were terrified I'd sue them for wrongful suspension or something. I didn't, for the record. Once they made it right and took appropriate action, I was satisfied. The new role came with a significant raise, better benefits, and honestly, a lot more respect from leadership than I'd had before. They knew I'd fought back with receipts and professionalism. Dana's court date got scheduled for about 6 months out. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd hired a lawyer and was trying to negotiate a plea deal. I don't know how it turned out, and honestly, I don't really care. She made her choices. She decided that winning was more important than integrity, and it cost her everything. The whole experience changed how I look at workplace competition. I used to think the biggest threat was someone outperforming you or networking better. I never imagined someone would actually commit crimes to get ahead. It's wild how someone's ego can convince them they're untouchable, that they're smart enough to get away with something like this. Dana had IT skills, sure, but she wasn't nearly as clever as she thought she was. Digital forensics has come a long way. Everything leaves a trail. Sometimes the best revenge is just giving someone enough rope to hang themselves. I didn't have to destroy Dana's career. She did that all on her own. I just had to be thorough enough to prove it. Speaking of people who think they're untouchable, wait until you hear what happened when a family secret got dragged into the light. My younger sister Jenna always had this energy about her, you know? The kind that made people want to be around her, listen to her, follow her. So when she started a lifestyle blog during her gap year, I wasn't surprised. What did surprise me was how fast it blew up. I'm talking overnight success. One day she had maybe 200 followers posting aesthetic coffee photos, and 3 months later she had brand deals with major companies, sponsorships rolling in, features in actual magazines. She was everywhere. My parents were so proud. Finally, Jenna had found her calling. I was happy for her at first, genuinely. I'd always been the creative one in the family, the one scribbling in journals and painting in my tiny apartment, working my graphic design job and dreaming of maybe one day getting my art out there. But I never had Jenna's confidence, her ability to just put herself out there without fear. So I cheered her on from the sidelines, watched her Instagram stories, liked her posts, supportive older sister, right? Then I started noticing things, little things at first. A poem she posted that sounded familiar, too familiar. I scrolled back through my old journals and there it was, word for word, something I'd written 3 years ago during a really dark period in my life. I told myself maybe it was coincidence. Maybe we'd had similar thoughts. We were sisters after all. But then came the artwork. She posted this whole series of illustrations to her blog, calling them her original pieces, talking about her creative process and inspiration. Except I recognized every single one. They were mine, pieces I'd created over the years, some from college, some more recent. I'd shown them to her, sent her photos when she asked to see what I was working on, because she said she wanted to support my art. She'd taken them, run them through some filters, maybe changed the colors slightly, and claimed them as her own aesthetic brand. The poetry got worse, story after story that I'd shared with her in confidence, deeply personal things about my struggles with anxiety and depression, my complicated relationship with our parents, my failed relationships, all of it repackaged into her curated feed, with her face attached. She'd turned my pain into her aesthetic. My actual lived experiences became her relatable content, and people ate it up. They loved her vulnerability, her authenticity, her brave honesty about mental health. It made me physically sick. I kept finding more. A whole blog post about overcoming childhood trauma that was beat for beat a conversation we'd had 2 years ago when I finally opened up to her about something I'd never told anyone. She'd nodded sympathetically, hugged me, told me she was there for me. Apparently, what she meant was she was there to mine my trauma for content. The worst part, she was making money off this, real money. She quit her part-time job, started traveling for brand partnerships, posted photos from hotels and restaurants I could never afford, all funded by a career built on stealing my life and calling it hers. I confronted her privately first. I'm not a monster. She was my sister. I called her, told her I'd noticed the similarities, asked if maybe we could talk about giving me credit, or at least acknowledging where some of the inspiration came from. I tried to be gentle about it. She laughed, actually laughed. Then she said the words I'll never forget as long as I live. You weren't doing anything with it anyway. What difference does it make? At least someone's getting use out of your sad girl poetry. You should be thanking me for making it relevant. I sat there in stunned silence while she kept going, told me I was being dramatic, that this was just how inspiration worked, that nothing was truly original anyway. Said if I had a problem with it, maybe I should have been brave enough to put myself out there first, instead of hiding in my apartment writing in journals nobody would ever read. That's when I knew exactly what I had to do. I spent the next 2 weeks building my case. I went through every single one of my old journals, the ones with dates on the entries. I pulled metadata from my artwork files, showing creation dates going back years. I screenshot every conversation where I'd shared these stories with Jenna. Messages where I'd sent her my poems asking for feedback. Photos of my paintings I'd texted her before she ever posted her versions. I organized everything chronologically, created side-by-side comparisons with timestamps. Then I made a website. Simple, clean, devastating. On one side, my original work with dates and proof of creation. On the other side, Jenna's posts with her upload dates. Poems matched word for word. Artwork with only minor filter changes. Personal stories she'd literally copy-pasted from our private conversations. I included screenshots of messages where she'd asked to see my work, where I'd confided in her, where she'd played the supportive sister while apparently taking notes for her next post. I titled it The Real Story Behind the Aesthetic, and I posted it everywhere, tagged her in it, sent it to the brands she worked with, posted it in Reddit communities that discussed influencer drama, sent it to the magazines that had featured her. The response was immediate and absolutely nuclear. Her comment sections exploded. People who'd followed her for her authenticity felt betrayed. They'd connected with her vulnerability, her artistic voice, her story, and now they knew none of it was real. It was all stolen from someone else, repackaged and sold back to them as genuine. The brands were even faster. Within 48 hours, every single sponsorship deal vanished. Companies don't play around with plagiarism and content theft. The magazine features got pulled. Her follower count started dropping so fast it was almost comical, from 150,000 to under 30,000 in a week. Jenna called me screaming, told me I'd ruined her life, destroyed her career, that I was jealous and petty and couldn't stand to see her succeed. I let her yell herself out and then very calmly said, "You didn't have a career. You had my career, and now neither of us has it." She threatened to sue me for defamation, actually got a lawyer involved, sent me a cease and desist letter demanding I take down the website. Her lawyer took one look at my evidence, the timestamps, the metadata, the paper trail of her theft, and told her she didn't have a case. You can't sue someone for defamation when they're telling the truth with receipts. The website stayed up. Our parents tried to play mediator at first, suggested we work it out as sisters. That family was more important than internet drama. But when I showed them the evidence, the sheer scale of what she'd stolen, even they couldn't defend it. Mom actually cried when she read some of the posts about my mental health struggles that Jenna had claimed as her own experiences. Jenna lost everything she'd built: the influencer career, the sponsorships, the validation, the carefully curated image, all of it gone. And the worst part for her, she couldn't even claim it was unfair because deep down she knew exactly what she'd done. She tried to rebrand a few months later, start fresh with a new account and a different aesthetic. But the internet doesn't forget. People recognized her. Screenshots of my website kept resurfacing. She'd been marked as a fraud, and no amount of rebranding could erase that. We don't talk anymore. Haven't spoken in over a year. My parents say she's working a regular job now, living a normal life far from social media. Part of me feels bad about that. She's still my sister. But then I remember her laughing on that phone call, telling me I wasn't doing anything with my pain anyway, and the guilt fades pretty quick. I actually started posting my own work after that. Not as an influencer, just as myself. My art, my words, my stories, properly attributed and wholly mine. It's a small following, nothing like what Jenna had, but it's real, and that matters more than I ever thought it would. Family betrayal cuts deep, but nothing compares to the earthquake that happens when the foundation of your entire childhood cracks open. So I'm 32 years old, living what I thought was a pretty normal life, when I decided to do one of those ancestry DNA tests. You know the kind. Everyone's doing them. They're supposed to tell you if you're part Viking or whatever, maybe connect you with some distant cousin you've never met who lives in Ohio. Harmless fun, right? I spit in the tube, mailed it off, and honestly forgot about it for like 6 weeks. When the results came back, I was expecting maybe some interesting percentages about my European heritage, or confirmation that yes, I am indeed pasty and prone to sunburn for genetic reasons. What I was not expecting was a notification that I had a close DNA match, a half-sister, named Jennifer. 38 years old, living 2 states away. I stared at that notification for a solid 10 minutes. Half-sister. I'm an only child, always have been. My parents never mentioned adoption, never hinted at anything unusual about my family history. I called my mum first, asked her if there was something I should know. She sounded genuinely confused, said no, asked why I was asking. I told her about the DNA match and she went quiet for a long time before saying she had no idea what that could be about and that I should talk to my dad. That should have been my first clue that something was very, very wrong. I messaged Jennifer through the DNA site, kept it casual, said I saw we matched as half-siblings, and was wondering if she knew anything about it. Her response came back within an hour, and it was long, really long. The kind of message you write when you've been waiting years for someone to finally ask the right question. She told me our dad had an entire first family, an entire first life. He'd been married before my mum, had 2 kids, Jennifer and her younger brother, and when Jennifer was 6 years old, he just vanished. Walked out one day and never came back. No note, no explanation, no forwarding address. Her mum tried to find him for years. Child support enforcement couldn't track him down. It was like he'd evaporated into thin air. And here's where it gets absurd. He hadn't evaporated. He'd just started over. New state, new name, new life. He met my mum 2 years after abandoning his first family. Told her he was an only child whose parents died in a car accident when he was young. Spun this whole tragic orphan backstory that made him seem deep and wounded and worth saving. My mum fell for it completely. They got married, had me, built a life together. Every single story I'd grown up hearing about my dad's past was a lie. The dead parents who supposedly loved him so much. The childhood as an only child. The tragic loss that shaped him. All of it was fabricated to cover up the fact that he'd abandoned a wife and 2 kids and reinvented himself from scratch. I felt like I was reading someone else's life. This couldn't be my dad. My dad was the guy who coached my soccer team and helped me with math homework and cried at my college graduation. He wasn't the kind of person who abandoned children. But that wasn't even the worst part. Jennifer sent me photos, her as a little girl with our dad. Him pushing her on a swing, holding her brother as a baby. Family photos from before he decided they weren't worth sticking around for. And in every single one of those photos, he looked exactly like the dad I knew. Same smile, same eyes. It was him, undeniably him. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never taken the test, never messaged Jennifer, never opened this door, but I couldn't. I had a sister, a brother, an entire half of my family I'd never known existed, and my dad had lied to all of us for over 3 decades. I decided I had to confront him. I owed that much to Jennifer, to her brother, to my mum, to myself. I drove to my parents' house on a Saturday afternoon, told them we needed to talk, and laid it all out. Showed them the DNA results, showed them Jennifer's messages, showed them the photos. My dad's face went white, like every drop of blood had drained out of his body in an instant. My mum looked back and forth between us, not understanding yet, still trying to piece it together. This is where patience finally snapped. I asked him directly, "Did you abandon a family before you met Mom? Did you lie about your entire past? Are these your kids?" He didn't even try to deny it, just dropped his head into his hands and started crying. Actual sobbing. And then he admitted everything. Yes, he'd been married before. Yes, he'd had 2 kids. Yes, he'd left them. He said he'd been drowning in debt, couldn't handle the pressure of being a husband and father, panicked and ran. He changed his name, moved states, started fresh. He said he thought about going back at first, but too much time passed and he convinced himself they were better off without him. He met my mum, fell in love, and decided to bury his past completely. He said he thought he could outrun it forever. The look on my mum's face was something I'll never forget. It was like watching someone's entire reality shatter in real time. She'd spent 33 years married to a man who didn't exist. The person she thought she knew, the tragic backstory she'd sympathized with, the foundation of their entire relationship was built on lies. She asked him how he could do that, how he could lie to her for over 3 decades, how he could abandon his own children and then just have another family, like the first one never existed. He didn't have a good answer, just kept saying he was sorry, he was a coward, he thought he was doing the right thing. Which is insane because there's no universe where abandoning your 6-year-old daughter and infant son is the right thing. My mom told him to get out. Right then. Didn't even let him pack a bag. Just said, "Get out of my house and figure out where you're going to sleep tonight because it's not here." I sat with her for hours after he left. She kept asking questions I couldn't answer. Did I ever really know him? Was any of it real? How could I not see it? I told her it wasn't her fault, that he was a skilled liar, that nobody could have known. But I'm not sure she believed me. I reached out to Jennifer again, told her I'd confronted our dad, and everything had blown up. She appreciated it, but said it didn't change anything for her. She'd spent 32 years without a father, and she wasn't interested in starting now. Her brother felt the same way. They'd made peace with his absence a long time ago, and finding out he'd just started a new family and pretended they didn't exist only confirmed that they were right to write him off. I asked if they wanted to meet anyway. Just us, half-siblings trying to figure out what we were to each other. Jennifer said maybe someday, but not yet. She needed time to process all of this. I understood. I needed time too. My parents filed for divorce 3 months later. My mom said she couldn't stay married to someone capable of that level of deception. Couldn't trust anything he said ever again. Couldn't reconcile the man she thought she married with the man who actually existed. My dad tried reaching out to me a few times, wanting to explain, wanting to apologize, wanting me to understand his side of things. I haven't responded. I don't know what he could possibly say that would make any of this okay. You don't accidentally abandon children. You don't accidentally lie to your wife for 33 years. You don't accidentally build an entire false identity and maintain it for decades. You almost have to admire the commitment it took to maintain that lie for so long. Except you can't, because it's horrifying. I've met Jennifer once since all this happened. Coffee in a neutral city halfway between where we both live. It was weird, we look alike. Same nose, same hands. But we're strangers. She has memories of a dad who left. I have memories of a dad who lied. Neither of us got the real version. Her brother still doesn't want contact, and I respect that. I'm a walking reminder that our dad replaced them and moved on. That's a hard thing to get past. Family dinners don't happen anymore. Holidays are awkward and separate. My mum is dating someone new and seems happier. But there's a sadness in her eyes that wasn't there before. My dad lives alone in an apartment across town and works a job where nobody knows his history. I still have the DNA test kit box. Sometimes I look at it and think about how $100 impulse purchase dismantled my entire family structure. One tube of spit, and suddenly everything I thought I knew was wrong. I don't regret taking the test. Jennifer and her brother deserve to know that our dad didn't die or disappear into witness protection or any of the other scenarios they might have imagined. They deserve to know he just chose to leave, and my mum deserved to know who she was actually married to. But it's strange to realize that your whole childhood was built on a foundation of lies, that every story your dad told about his past was carefully constructed fiction, that somewhere out there you have siblings who grew up without a father because he decided you were worth staying for and they weren't. I took a DNA test for fun, to learn about my ancestry, to maybe find some distant relatives. Instead, I found out my dad was someone else entirely, and it destroyed the family I thought I had. And if you think parents can destroy families, just wait until you see what happened at what should have been the proudest moment of someone's life. My college graduation was supposed to be my moment. 4 years of grinding through classes while working 3 jobs, surviving on instant ramen and coffee, pulling all-nighters to finish papers after closing shifts at the diner. I'd done it all while taking care of my mum, who'd been claiming disability for the last 6 years. She said she couldn't work, could barely function, needed me for everything. Doctor's appointments, grocery shopping, paying her bills because she was too unwell to manage her own finances. I was her daughter and her caretaker, and apparently her personal ATM. But I'd made it. I was graduating with honors. My professors knew my story, knew how hard I'd worked, and they were proud of me. I was proud of me. For the first time in years, I had something that was mine, an accomplishment that had nothing to do with being anyone's caretaker or support system. Just me and my degree, and the future I'd fought for. My mum came to the ceremony. I didn't really want her there if I'm being honest, but she insisted. Made a whole thing about how she wouldn't miss her daughter's graduation for the world, how proud she was, how she'd drag herself there no matter how much pain she was in. I felt guilty for not wanting her there, so I didn't argue. I arranged for her to sit in the accessible seating, made sure she had everything she needed, and tried to focus on my day. The ceremony started fine. I sat with my classmates, listened to the speeches, waited for my name to be called. When it finally was, I walked across that stage feeling like I was floating. 4 years of sacrifice and exhaustion and barely sleeping, and here I was. I shook the dean's hand, accepted my diploma, smiled for the photo. It was perfect. Then I heard screaming. My mom had stood up in the accessible section and was yelling my name. Not cheering, yelling, screaming that I was abandoning her, that I was ungrateful, that after everything she'd done for me, this was how I repaid her. People started turning around, staring. The dean looked confused. I stood there frozen on stage, diploma in hand, while my mother had a complete meltdown in front of everyone. Security started moving toward her, but she was faster. She somehow made it down to the floor level. This woman who claimed she could barely walk without assistance and tried to physically grab me as I came off the stage. She was pulling at my gown, screaming about how I was leaving her to suffer alone, how I was selfish and cruel. It took 2 security guards to pull her off me. They escorted her out while she continued screaming, and I stood there in front of hundreds of people, my classmates, my professors, completely humiliated. The ceremony continued, but I barely remember the rest of it. I sat in my seat feeling numb, feeling like she'd taken the one thing I had and destroyed it. My friends tried to comfort me afterward, told me it wasn't my fault, but the damage was done. That was going to be everyone's memory of my graduation. Not my achievement, not my hard work, just my mother's very public breakdown. I drove home that night and sat in my car for a long time before going inside, and something in me just snapped. I was done. I'd spent 6 years catering to her disability, sacrificing my own life, my own happiness, my own financial stability to take care of her, and she'd repaid me by turning my graduation into a circus. That's when I remembered the Ring camera. I'd installed it at the house about 8 months ago, partly for security, but mostly because I'd started noticing things that didn't add up. Times when I'd come home and she'd clearly been more active than she claimed. Small things that made me suspicious. The camera had been recording everything. I went inside, ignored my mom who was still playing the victim and crying about how I'd embarrassed her, and I went straight to my laptop. I started going through months of footage, and what I found made me physically ill. There was my mother, who claimed she couldn't walk without severe pain, going to yoga classes twice a week. There she was, hiking with friends on trails I'd been begging her to let me take her to for physical therapy. Shopping, gardening, having friends over for wine nights where she was perfectly mobile and active. And the biggest one, working a cash under the table job at her friend's salon, doing hair 4 days a week. She'd been faking her disability, not exaggerating, not having good days and bad days, fully faking it, for years, while collecting government disability benefits, while forcing me to work 3 jobs to support both of us because she claimed she couldn't contribute financially, while making me her full-time caretaker, guilting me constantly about how much she needed me, how I was all she had. I sat there watching footage of my mother living a completely normal, active life during the hours I was at work or school, and then watching her transform into a helpless invalid the moment I came home. The performance was actually impressive in how consistent it was, but that wasn't even the worst part. I found footage of her on the phone with her sister, my aunt, laughing about how easy it was to get disability, how the trick was to just be consistent with the act, joking about how I was so gullible, so eager to be a good daughter that I never questioned her. She called me her retirement plan. I genuinely thought this couldn't get worse. I was wrong. I spent the entire night editing together a compilation. The yoga classes, the hiking, the salon job, the phone calls. I included dates and timestamps. I added context, explained that this was my mother, who'd been collecting disability for 6 years, who I'd been supporting financially and physically because she claimed she couldn't work or function independently. Then I posted it. Facebook, where all our extended family would see it. Twitter. I sent it to the Disability Fraud Investigation Department with a detailed letter explaining everything. I documented every lie, every manipulation, every time she'd guilt-tripped me into sacrificing something because of her supposed condition. The response was immediate and catastrophic. My aunt called within an hour, screaming at me for betraying family. Other relatives started weighing in, calling me cruel and heartless for exposing her. But more people were horrified. People who'd watched me struggle for years, who'd seen how exhausted I always was, who'd wondered why I was working myself to death while my mum sat at home. They understood. The fraud investigation started within days. Federal investigators showed up at the house. My mum tried to play the victim, claimed I'd doctored the footage, that I was lying because I was angry about some family drama. But Ring camera footage has metadata, timestamps that can't be faked, and I had months of it. They audited her benefits, her medical claims, everything. Talked to her doctors who'd been prescribing treatments for conditions she apparently didn't actually have. Interviewed her friends from yoga and the salon. The evidence was overwhelming. She was charged with disability fraud and making false statements. She lost her benefits immediately. They calculated she'd fraudulently collected over $70,000 across 6 years. She had to repay it, plus fines, plus legal fees. Her friend who'd been paying her under the table at the salon also got investigated for tax evasion. My extended family completely turned on me. Aunts and uncles who'd known me since I was a baby disowned me for destroying her life. My cousins blocked me on everything. Family events I was no longer invited to. They said I was vindictive, that I should have handled it privately, that you don't do this to family no matter what. But here's the thing. I'd tried handling it privately for 6 years. I'd been the perfect caretaker, the devoted daughter, the one who sacrificed everything, and she'd exploited that, manipulated it, turned my love for her into a weapon she used to control my entire life. She'd stolen years from me, stolen my money, stolen my youth, and then she tried to steal my graduation too. My mom ended up pleading guilty to avoid jail time. She got probation, community service, and a repayment plan that will take her years to complete. She had to get an actual job, a real one with taxes and everything. Last I heard, she's working retail and living in a small apartment she can barely afford. We don't speak. She's tried to reach out a few times through relatives, playing the victim, saying I destroyed her over one mistake. One mistake, 6 years of systematic fraud and manipulation, and she calls it one mistake. I moved across the country after graduation, got a job in my field, started actually living my life for the first time since high school. I'm not working 3 jobs anymore. I'm not exhausted all the time. I don't have someone guilt-tripping me every single day for having my own dreams and goals. I got my life back. Some of my old friends from college have asked if I regret it, if maybe I went too far. And honestly, no. She made her choices. She chose to fake a disability, to commit fraud, to manipulate her own daughter for years. I just chose to stop letting her get away with it. The consequences she's facing aren't because of me. They're because of what she did. I just made sure the truth came out. You know what they say about the truth. It always comes out eventually, and sometimes it brings down everything you thought you knew. I took one of those DNA tests on a whim. You know the kind. Everyone's doing them. Finding out they're 3% Scandinavian, or discovering a second cousin twice removed in Maine. I thought it would be fun, maybe give me some interesting conversation starters at parties. Learn about my ancestry. Trace my roots back to wherever my family originally came from. Harmless curiosity. The results came back on a Tuesday afternoon. I was eating lunch at my desk when the email notification popped up. I clicked through, expecting to see percentages and maps, and maybe a list of distant relatives who shared 0.05% of my DNA. Instead, I found a close match. Parent-child relationship. Confidence level 99.9%. And the name attached to it wasn't my dad. It was someone called Richard Castellano, a man I had never heard of in my entire life. I sat there staring at the screen, my sandwich forgotten, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be a mistake. Maybe the lab mixed up samples. Maybe their algorithm was wrong. But DNA tests don't really make mistakes like that. Not at a 99.9% confidence level for a parent-child match. I did what anyone would do. I went down the rabbit hole. I searched Richard Castellano online, cross-referenced with my mum's maiden name, looked through old social media posts, and that's when I found it. Photos from 29 years ago of my mum at a corporate event, standing next to a man who looked exactly like the profile picture on the DNA site. Richard Castellano, her boss at the marketing firm where she used to work. My hands were shaking as I kept digging. I found his LinkedIn, his Facebook, photos of him with his wife and kids, half-siblings I didn't know existed, a whole entire family tree I was apparently connected to but had never been told about. I called my mum, didn't even plan what I was going to say, just called her and said I needed to talk, that it was important, that she needed to come over right now. She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't argue. Said she'd be there in 20 minutes. When she walked into my apartment, I had my laptop open to the DNA results. I didn't ease into it, just turned the screen toward her and asked her to explain. The color drained from her face. She actually swayed a little, like she might pass out. Then she sat down on my couch and started crying. Not the kind of crying you do when you're sad. The kind you do when something you've been running from for decades finally catches up. She admitted everything. Yes, she'd had an affair with Richard Castellano 29 years ago. Yes, he was my biological father. Yes, the man I'd called Dad my entire life wasn't actually related to me by blood. She said it had been a brief thing, a few months of poor decisions when her marriage was struggling. When she found out she was pregnant, she wasn't sure whose child I was, but when I was born, she knew. I apparently looked exactly like Richard. Here's where it gets absurd. My dad, the man who raised me, knew. He'd known from the beginning. My mom had confessed when I was just a few months old, terrified he'd leave her. Instead, he made a choice to stay, to raise me as his own, to never tell me the truth. He made my mom promise they'd take it to their graves. Nobody would ever know. I would grow up believing he was my biological father, and that would be that. I asked about Richard, about my biological father. Did he know about me? That's when my mum dropped the next bomb. Yes, he knew. He'd wanted to be involved, wanted to be part of my life. But my mum had threatened him with legal action, told him if he ever contacted me or tried to be part of my life, she'd destroy his marriage and his career. She'd make sure everyone knew about the affair. So he backed off, but he didn't disappear completely. He'd been sending money, for years, through a lawyer, monthly payments meant for my education, my future, my well-being. Thousands of dollars over nearly 3 decades. My mum had been taking that money and spending it on herself. Vacations, shopping, home renovations. I'd taken out student loans for college while my biological father was sending money specifically meant for my education, and my mum was using it to remodel her kitchen. I felt like I was going to be sick. I called my dad next, the man who raised me, asked him to come over too, said mum was already there and we needed to talk. When he arrived and saw my mum's face, saw the laptop, he knew immediately what had happened. I asked him why he never told me, why he let me grow up believing a lie. He said he'd made a promise to my mum, that he'd love me from the moment I was born regardless of biology, that he was my father in every way that mattered, and he didn't want me growing up with the confusion and pain of knowing the truth. He thought he was protecting me. The thing is, I understood his logic on some level, but I was 29 years old. I'd spent my entire life building an identity based on false information. Every time someone said I had my dad's eyes or his sense of humor, it was based on a lie. Every family tree project in school, every medical history form, all of it was wrong. And my biological father, Richard, he'd wanted to know me. He'd tried, and my mum had kept him away while taking his money. I reached out to Richard the next day, sent him a message through the DNA site explaining who I was, that I'd just found out, that I'd like to talk if he was open to it. His response came within an hour. He'd been waiting 29 years for me to contact him. We met for coffee that weekend. It was surreal, sitting across from someone who was genetically my father, but was essentially a stranger. He looked like me, or I looked like him. Same nose, same hands, same mannerisms. It was like looking into a mirror that showed me an alternate version of my life. He told me his side of the story. The affair, the pregnancy, my mum's threats. He said not a day had gone by that he didn't think about me, wonder what I was like, wish he could be part of my life. The money had been his way of trying to contribute, of feeling like he was doing something even if he couldn't be there. He'd gotten married a few years after I was born, had 2 kids, built a life, but he'd always wondered about me, always hoped that someday I'd find out and reach out. Things went from bad to unhinged when I told my parents I was pursuing a relationship with Richard. My mum begged me not to, said it would destroy our family, that I was choosing a stranger over the people who raised me. My dad, the man who'd been my father for 29 years, went quiet. He stopped calling, stopped coming around. When I'd see him, he couldn't look at me the same way. It was like every time he saw my face, he saw Richard, saw the affair, saw the lie he'd been living. Their marriage imploded within months. All those years of buried secrets, the resentment my dad must have been carrying, the guilt my mum had been living with, it all came pouring out. They separated, started divorce proceedings, 30 years of marriage destroyed because the foundation had been built on lies. My extended family found out through the grapevine. Some sided with my mum, said I was being cruel by pursuing a relationship with Richard. Others were horrified by what she'd done, cutting her off entirely. Family gatherings became impossible. Everyone had an opinion about what I should do, who I should be loyal to, how I should handle it. I have a relationship with Richard now. We meet for dinner once a month. I've met his wife, my half-siblings. They're good people. It's strange building a relationship with a biological father at 29, but we're trying. He's been nothing but respectful of the situation, understanding that this is complicated and messy, and there's no roadmap for how to navigate it. But I lost my dad in the process, the man who raised me, who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with homework and walked me down the aisle at my wedding. He couldn't handle it, couldn't separate me from the reminder of my mum's betrayal. We barely speak now. When we do, it's stilted and awkward, nothing like it used to be. Every family photo I have feels like a lie now. Birthday parties, holidays, graduations, all of it built on a secret that everyone knew but me. I look at pictures of my dad holding me as a baby, and I wonder what he was thinking. Was he happy? Resentful? Did he ever regret his choice to stay? I don't regret taking the DNA test. I deserve to know the truth. Richard deserved to finally have a relationship with his daughter, but the cost was higher than I ever imagined. I traded one family for the painful truth and the fragments of what's left. My mum still doesn't understand why I'm angry. She thinks she was protecting everyone, making the hard choices. She doesn't see that she stole nearly 3 decades from both me and Richard, that she took money meant for me and spent it on herself, that her lies destroyed multiple families, not just our own. I'm 29 years old and I'm still trying to figure out who I am now, that everything I thought I knew about my identity has been rewritten. It's a strange kind of grief, mourning a version of yourself and your family that turned out to never really exist. While some people are discovering family secrets, others are dealing with siblings who'll do anything to win. My brother Marcus was always the golden child. Successful lawyer, beautiful wife, two perfect kids, the kind of son who made my parents beam with pride at every family gathering. I was the other one, the one who'd taken a more creative path, freelanced, lived in a smaller apartment, drove an older car. Not unsuccessful, just different. But in my dad's eyes, different meant lesser. When our grandmother passed away, she left behind some valuable jewelry. Nothing museum-worthy, but pieces that had been in our family for generations. Sapphire earrings, a diamond bracelet, a few rings that were worth maybe 20,000 total. The kind of stuff you keep for sentimental value and maybe pass down to your own kids someday. We were all at my parents' house after the funeral, going through her things, when my mom realized the jewelry box was missing. Not misplaced, completely gone. We searched everywhere, checked every room, every closet, asked everyone who'd been in the house. Nothing. That's when Marcus spoke up. He was sitting on the couch doing that thing where he looked concerned but thoughtful, like he was carefully considering his words. He said maybe, and he hated to even suggest it, but maybe I should check my bag. You know, just to be thorough. He added that I'd been struggling financially lately, which everyone knew, and maybe in a moment of weakness I'd made a bad decision. The way he said it was so careful, so gentle, like he was trying to protect me from myself. But the implication was crystal clear. My parents looked at me, actually looked at me like I was capable of stealing from my dead grandmother. My dad asked if I'd taken the jewelry. Not if I'd seen it, not if I had any idea where it might be. He asked if I'd taken it. I was so stunned I couldn't even respond at first. When I finally found my voice, I said, "No, of course not. Why would he even think that?" But the damage was done. I could see it in their faces. Marcus had planted the seed, and it had taken root immediately. My mum searched my purse while I stood there in shock. They went through my car. My dad even called my apartment landlord to ask if they could do a welfare check, which was code for search my place. They found nothing, because there was nothing to find, but it didn't matter. The accusation had been made by their perfect son, and I was already guilty in their minds. Family dinners became tense. I'd show up and get treated like I was on probation. Eventually, I just stopped getting invited. Holidays, birthdays, casual Sunday lunches, all of it dried up. My mum would post photos on Facebook of family gatherings I wasn't at. Marcus front and center, his arm around Dad, everyone smiling. I was cut out, erased, all because my brother had pointed a finger and my parents had believed him without question. 6 months of this. 6 months of being treated like a criminal by my own family, while Marcus continued to be the golden child, the trusted one, the son who could do no wrong. I was angry, hurt, but mostly I was confused. Why would he do this? What did he gain from destroying my relationship with our parents? Then I had a thought that kept me up at night. What if Marcus had taken the jewelry himself? What if he'd framed me to cover his own tracks? It seemed paranoid at first. Marcus was a successful lawyer. He didn't need money. He had a great job, a nice house. No reason to steal from his own grandmother. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. So I did something that probably seems extreme. I hired a private investigator. I told the PI what had happened, gave him Marcus's information, and asked him to just look into whether anything seemed off. Financial trouble, unusual spending, anything that might explain why he'd need quick cash. What the PI found made my blood run cold. Marcus had been stealing from his law firm's client trust accounts for over 2 years. Small amounts at first, a few thousand here and there that he'd cover before anyone noticed. But it had escalated. He'd take money meant for client settlements, use it to cover personal expenses, then scramble to replace it before audits. He was running a shell game with other people's money. And why did he need the money? Gambling. High-stakes poker games, sports betting, online casinos. Marcus had racked up over 100,000 in gambling debts to some very serious people. People who don't just send reminder notices when you're late on payment. But that wasn't even the worst part. The PI found pawn shop records, 3 different shops, all within 2 weeks of Grandma's funeral. Items matching the exact description of her jewelry, pawned by someone who signed Marcus's name. The shops had copies of his ID, time-stamped security footage of him handing over the pieces. He'd stolen our grandmother's jewelry, pawned it for maybe 8,000 total, which was a fraction of what it was worth, and used the money to make a payment to his bookies. Then he'd framed me to make sure nobody looked in his direction. I sat in my apartment staring at the PI's report, feeling absolutely sick. My own brother had destroyed my relationship with my family to cover up his gambling addiction and theft, and he'd done it so smoothly, so convincingly, that nobody had questioned it. I gathered everything: the PI's full report, the pawn shop records with Marcus's signature and security footage, bank statements showing the deposits and withdrawals that lined up with his gambling activity, documentation of his theft from the client trust accounts. I compiled it all into a folder. Then I sent it to 2 places simultaneously: his law firm's ethics board and my parents'. The email to my parents was simple. Subject line: the truth about grandma's jewelry. Body: see attached. I didn't editorialize, didn't add commentary, just let the evidence speak for itself. What happened next? Nobody saw it coming. The law firm launched an immediate investigation. They suspended Marcus pending review, which in the legal world is basically a public announcement that you're done. The state bar got involved. A full audit of every client account he'd touched revealed the extent of his theft. Over $150,000 stolen from clients over 2 years. He was disbarred within 3 months, the fastest disbarment proceeding anyone at the firm had ever seen. He was also charged with embezzlement, fraud, and theft. His lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the evidence was overwhelming. Marcus ended up pleading guilty and got sentenced to 4 years in prison. His wife filed for divorce before the trial even started, took the kids, moved back to her parents' place across the country. She released a statement through her lawyer saying she'd had no knowledge of his activities and was cooperating fully with investigators. His perfect life imploded. The successful lawyer career, the beautiful family, the reputation, all of it gone. And unlike when he'd destroyed my reputation with a simple accusation, his destruction was backed by actual evidence of actual crimes he'd actually committed. My parents called me the day after I sent the email, both of them on speakerphone, crying. My mum was apologizing, saying they'd made a horrible mistake, that they should have believed me. My dad said he was sorry, that he'd let his favoritism blind him, that he wanted to make it right. I listened to them grovel for maybe 10 minutes. Then I said the only thing I could say. You made your choice when you believed him, without question. You decided I was capable of stealing from my dying grandmother based on nothing but his word. You cut me out of the family, treated me like a criminal, and never once asked for my side of the story. You don't get to apologize now that you know you backed the wrong son. My dad tried to argue, said parents make mistakes, that family forgives. I told him he was right, family should forgive. Too bad he'd made it clear 6 months ago that I wasn't really family. I haven't spoken to them since. They've tried reaching out, sent letters, showed up at my apartment a few times. I don't answer. They made their choice, and I've made mine. Marcus sent me a letter from prison a year into his sentence. It was full of excuses and justifications, how the gambling had gotten out of control, how he'd panicked and made bad decisions. He said he was sorry for what he'd done to me, but in the same breath tried to say I'd destroyed his life by exposing him, like I was somehow the villain for proving I was innocent. I didn't write back. The thing is, I didn't destroy Marcus's life. He did that himself. I just made sure the truth came out, the same way he'd made sure a lie about me spread. The difference was my truth had evidence. His accusation had nothing but my parents' willingness to believe their golden child over their other kid. Betrayal from family is brutal, but there's something uniquely devastating about discovering the person you are about to marry isn't who they claim to be. My fiancé Tom traveled for work constantly. Like, he was gone more than he was home. 3, sometimes 4 days a week, flying to different cities for meetings, conferences, client presentations. It had been that way since we started dating 3 years ago. I'd gotten used to it. We FaceTimed every night he was away. He texted me updates throughout the day, sent me photos from airports and hotel rooms. I trusted him completely. Why wouldn't I? He'd proposed 8 months ago with this beautiful ring. We'd set a date, started planning the wedding. Everything seemed perfect. Then I got a Facebook message from a woman named Rachel. The message was short and direct. Hi, I know this is going to sound crazy, But do you know that Tom is engaged to me too? My first thought was that this was some kind of scam, catfishing or identity theft or whatever. People do weird things online. I almost deleted it without responding, but something made me click on her profile. It was public, and there, in her photos, was Tom. My Tom. At what looked like a family barbecue with people I'd never seen before. Tom at a restaurant with this woman, his arm around her. Tom holding up a ring box in what was clearly a proposal photo. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. I responded asking for proof. She sent it immediately, photos spanning back 2 years. Tom with her at Christmas, Tom meeting her parents, Tom on vacation with her in Mexico, a trip he told me was a work conference, and then the real gut punch. A photo of her hand wearing a ring almost identical to mine. Not exactly the same, but close enough that he'd clearly gone to the same jeweler and picked a similar style. She also sent me a save the date card for a wedding. Tom and Rachel. 3 months after the date Tom and I had set for our wedding, I sat there staring at my phone, hands shaking, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't possible. Tom was with me. We lived together. How could he possibly be engaged to someone else? But that wasn't even the worst part. Rachel and I started comparing notes. We talked for hours that first night, going through everything, trying to piece together how he'd pulled this off. And the details were insane. He'd given us different last names, told her his last name was Morrison, told me it was Mitchell. He'd created entirely separate identities, different job details, different friend groups. He told her he worked in pharmaceutical sales, told me he was in medical device sales. Close enough that the travel made sense for both stories, but different enough that we'd never crossed paths professionally. He'd divided his time meticulously. When he told me he was traveling for work, sometimes he actually was, but other times he was with her. And when he told her he was traveling, he was with me. He'd been juggling 2 complete relationships, 2 sets of families, 2 wedding plans, for 2 solid years. The level of organization it must have taken is almost impressive if it wasn't completely sociopathic. Rachel was just as devastated as I was. She'd trusted him completely too. She'd introduced him to her family, her friends. They were planning a whole life together, and neither of us had any idea the other existed. We decided pretty quickly that we weren't going to just walk away quietly. This wasn't a situation where we could have a private conversation with Tom and end things like adults. He'd lied to both of us for years, maintained 2 separate lives, proposed to both of us, planned 2 weddings. This required something bigger. His company was having their annual gala in 2 weeks. Tom had mentioned it to me in passing, said it was a big formal event where they gave out awards and schmoozed with clients. He'd told me I couldn't come because it was employees only. Of course he had. I would bet anything he'd told Rachel the same thing. Rachel and I planned everything carefully. We both RSVP'd as his +1 through different contacts at his company. We coordinated our outfits, both wearing red dresses because why not make an entrance? We showed up separately but met in the lobby before going in. Walking into that ballroom together was surreal. We scanned the room looking for Tom, found him near the bar talking to a group of colleagues, completely relaxed, completely unsuspecting. We walked straight up to him, side by side. The look on his face when he saw us together will be burned into my memory forever. Pure terror. His face went white. He actually stammered, couldn't form words. His colleagues were looking between us and him, clearly confused. Rachel spoke first, very calmly, very clearly. She said, "Hi, honey. I'd like you to meet your other fiancé." I held up my left hand, showing the ring. She held up hers. Identical stones, similar settings, both clearly engagement rings. The people around us went silent. You could see them processing what was happening, the confusion turning to shock, turning to fascination. Tom tried to pull us aside, said we needed to talk privately. We refused. We'd planned this perfectly and we weren't backing down. The gala had a program, awards, speeches, the usual corporate event structure. We waited until the awards portion started, until Tom's boss was at the podium talking about company values and integrity. Then we stood up. Rachel had printed out a timeline, dates, locations, photos, a whole presentation of Tom's double life laid out in chronological order. We'd made copies and we started handing them out to the tables around us. People were reading them, looking at the photos, looking at Tom, who was now trying to physically leave but was blocked in by the crowd. I took the microphone from a very confused event coordinator and said exactly what we'd rehearsed, that Tom had been engaged to both of us simultaneously, that he'd been using company travel funds to maintain both relationships, that everything he'd told his employers and colleagues about his personal life was a lie. Rachel added that we'd documented everything, had receipts for trips he'd claimed were business-related that were actually personal, had proof of expense reports that didn't match where he actually was. The room was dead silent except for our voices. Tom's boss looked like he was going to have a stroke. His face went from confused to furious in about 3 seconds. He got up, walked straight to Tom, and told him to leave immediately and report to HR first thing Monday morning. Tom tried to argue, tried to explain, but there was no explanation that would make this okay. He'd committed expense fraud at minimum, possibly more, and he'd done it all in front of the entire company leadership and their biggest clients. He was fired the next day, not just for the personal drama, but for the documented misuse of company funds. They'd audited his expense reports and found thousands of dollars in fraudulent claims, trips that were supposedly for client meetings, but were actually visits to see Rachel. Hotels he'd claimed were for conferences that were actually romantic getaways. The company threatened legal action if he didn't agree to repay everything immediately. His career in that industry is basically over. Word spread fast. That kind of scandal doesn't stay quiet. Rachel and I actually became friends through all of this. We'd both been victims of the same con, both had our lives turned upside down by the same person. We supported each other through the breakups, the untangling of wedding plans, the awkward conversations with family and friends. She's honestly great. We get coffee sometimes, text regularly. It's the weirdest friendship origin story ever, but it works. As for Tom, last I heard he was single and unemployed, living with his parents trying to rebuild his life from scratch. Both of our families know what he did. All of his friends know. His professional reputation is destroyed. He burned every bridge trying to maintain a double life that was always going to collapse eventually. The thing that gets me is how long he thought he could keep it going. 2 years of constant lies, constant coordination, constant risk. Did he actually think he'd make it to both weddings? That he'd just have 2 wives living in different cities and somehow keep juggling both lives forever? The audacity is genuinely breathtaking. I'm doing okay now. It took a while to process everything, to work through the betrayal and the humiliation and the anger. Therapy helped, Rachel's friendship helped, time helped. I look back at photos of Tom and me together, and I don't even recognize that version of myself. The person who trusted so completely, who never questioned his constant travel or his need for privacy about work stuff. All the red flags I missed because I wanted to believe in us. Rachel says the same thing. We were both so invested in the relationship, so in love with who we thought he was, that we didn't see what was actually happening. My only regret is that I didn't expose him somewhere even more public. The gala was satisfying, don't get me wrong, but sometimes I think about how perfect it would have been to do it at one of the weddings. Let him get all the way to the altar before everything exploded. But then I remember his face when Rachel and I walked up to him together at that gala. The moment he realized his entire carefully constructed double life was about to crumble in the most public way possible, and I feel pretty satisfied with how it went down. If you think that's wild, imagine discovering your partner had an entire backup plan for when you eventually figured things out. For months, I felt like I was losing my mind, like genuinely questioning my own sanity, wondering if I needed to see a doctor about early onset dementia or something. It started small. I'd mention plans Alex and I had made for the weekend, dinner reservations I'd booked, conversations we'd had the night before, and they'd look at me like I'd grown a second head. They'd say we never discussed it, that I must be confused, that maybe I was thinking of plans with someone else. At first I believed them. Maybe I was mixing things up. Life gets busy, memories blur together, but it kept happening, over and over. I'd swear we'd agreed to something, and Alex would insist we hadn't. They'd do it so calmly, so convincingly, that I started doubting every memory I had. Then things started appearing in our apartment. A coffee mug I'd never seen before. Alex said it had always been there, that I just never noticed. A jacket hanging in the closet that definitely wasn't mine and definitely wasn't Alex's style. They claimed they'd had it for years. I felt like I was going insane. Was I really that unobservant? That forgetful? I started writing things down, keeping notes on my phone about conversations we had, plans we made, anything important. Alex noticed and asked why I was suddenly so obsessed with documenting everything. I told them I was worried about my memory. They suggested maybe I should see someone about it, talk to a doctor. They were so concerned, so supportive. It made me feel even worse. But then I started noticing patterns. The things I supposedly forgot or misremembered always seemed to benefit Alex in some way. Plans I thought we'd made that would have conflicted with times they said they had to work late. Conversations about finances I could have sworn we'd had, but they denied, right before making a big purchase. It was too convenient. So I did something that felt insane at the time, but turned out to be the smartest decision I ever made. I started recording our conversations. Not all of them, just the important ones. When we discussed plans, when we talked about anything significant, I'd have my phone recording in my pocket. I told myself I was doing it to prove I wasn't crazy, that my memory was fine. I was right. I'd play back conversations where we clearly discussed weekend plans or financial decisions, and then Alex would deny those conversations ever happened. I had proof I wasn't losing my mind, but I didn't confront them yet. Something told me there was more going on. That's when I found the second phone. I was looking for my sunglasses in Alex's car, checked the glove compartment, moved some papers around. There was a phone tucked under the registration documents. Not Alex's regular phone, a completely different one. My stomach dropped immediately because there's only one reason someone has a secret second phone. I should have left it alone. Should have confronted Alex right then, but I needed to know. I unlocked it, the passcode was ridiculously easy, and started reading. Messages with someone named Jordan. Months and months of messages. Flirty texts, romantic plans, explicit photos. But that wasn't even the worst part. They were planning Alex's exit strategy from our relationship. Discussing how Alex was just waiting for the right time to leave, but needed to secure the new living situation first. Jordan had apparently been apartment hunting for them. They'd already looked at places together. There were messages about furniture, about which of our shared things Alex wanted to take, about timing the breakup for maximum financial advantage. And then I found the messages about me, about how Alex had been making me doubt myself so I wouldn't notice what was going on. Jordan had actually suggested it, said it would keep me distracted and confused while they finalized their plans. They'd been deliberately gaslighting me, strategically making me question my sanity so I'd be too unstable to see the truth. The level of calculation was breathtaking. Every time I'd questioned my memory, every moment I'd felt like I was going crazy, it had been intentional manipulation. They'd been making me feel insane on purpose. I sat in that car reading messages for probably an hour. My hands were shaking. I felt sick. But I also felt clarity for the first time in months. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't forgetful. I'd been deliberately psychologically manipulated by someone I loved and trusted. I took photos of everything, every message, every plan, every cruel conversation about how easy it was to mess with my head. Then I put the phone back exactly where I found it. I went home and started packing. Not frantically, not emotionally, methodically. I called my best friend Sarah, asked if I could stay with her for a while. She said yes immediately, asked if I was okay. I told her I'd explain later, but I needed to move out and I needed to do it today. It took me about 6 hours to pack up everything that mattered to me. Clothes, personal items, things I'd brought into the relationship. I loaded it all into Sarah's car while Alex was at work, or at least claiming to be at work. They were probably with Jordan. Then came the breaking point. I printed everything, every message from the second phone, every recording I'd made of our conversations where we discussed plans that Alex later denied. I organized it all chronologically, showed the pattern of gaslighting, the deliberate manipulation, the affair, the exit strategy. I laid it all out on our kitchen table like evidence at a trial. I wrote one sentence on a note. I'm not crazy. You're just cruel. Left my key on top of the pile, and then I left. Blocked Alex's number immediately. Blocked them on everything. I didn't want to hear the excuses, the explanations, the inevitable attempts to twist it around and make me doubt what I knew to be true. Sarah told me later that Alex tried to call her, tried to get her to tell me to come back, that we needed to talk. Sarah, bless her, told them exactly where they could shove their explanations. The calls and texts came through anyway from different numbers. Alex was frantic, saying it wasn't what it looked like, that they could explain, that Jordan didn't mean anything. The classic playbook. I deleted every message without reading past the first line. Here's the thing though, Karma apparently has a sense of humor. I found out through mutual friends that Jordan had somehow discovered the full extent of Alex's gaslighting tactics. Maybe they got spooked about what Alex had done to me and wondered what Alex might do to them. Maybe someone told them. Either way, Jordan apparently decided that someone willing to psychologically torture their partner for months wasn't exactly relationship material. Jordan dumped Alex, just completely ghosted them. The apartment they'd been planning to move into together, Jordan took it solo and blocked Alex everywhere. So Alex ended up alone in our old apartment they couldn't really afford solo, with no partner and no backup plan. The strategic exit they'd been planning for months collapsed because their accomplice in emotional abuse got cold feet. Mutual friends said Alex tried to reach out, wanted to apologize, claimed they'd changed and wanted to make things right. I never responded. There's no coming back from what they did. You don't accidentally gaslight someone for months. You don't accidentally carry on an affair while plotting your escape. Those are choices, deliberate, calculated, cruel choices. I'm doing better now. It took a few months of therapy to undo the damage, to rebuild my confidence in my own memory and perception. My therapist said what Alex did was textbook psychological abuse. Hearing a professional validate that I wasn't overreacting helped more than I can explain. I still have the recordings and the messages saved. Not because I ever plan to use them, but because sometimes when I doubt myself about smaller things, I need the reminder that my instincts were right, that I'm not the unreliable narrator of my own life. Alex tried one more time to reach out about 6 months later, sent a long email about how sorry they were, how they'd been in therapy, how they understood now what they'd done wrong, asked if we could talk, maybe get coffee. I deleted it. Some betrayals are unforgivable. This was one of them. The wild part is Alex probably thought they were being so clever, playing both sides, keeping me confused and compliant while setting up their perfect exit. But they underestimated two things. First, that I'd eventually trust my own reality enough to seek proof, and second, that their new partner might have standards. Sometimes the best revenge really is just stepping back and letting people face the consequences of their own actions. Sometimes the worst betrayals come from the people we confide in most, which brings me to this next absolute nightmare. Lily was my best friend for 6 years, the kind of friend you tell everything to, the person who knows all your secrets, all your fears, all the things you're too ashamed to say out loud to anyone else. I'd confided in her about my anxiety, the panic attacks I used to hide from everyone, the complicated trauma with my family that I was working through in therapy, mistakes I'd made in past relationships that I regretted, things I'd never told another soul. She knew everything, and I thought that was what best friends were for, to hold your darkest moments and keep them safe. To be the person you could be completely vulnerable with, without fear of judgment. I was so incredibly wrong about her. We had a falling out over something stupid. I can't even remember what started it. Something about her cancelling plans last minute for the third time in a row. Me finally saying it bothered me. Her getting defensive. Normal friend friction that should have been resolved with a conversation and maybe some space. Instead, Lily decided to go nuclear. Within a week, I noticed people in our friend group acting weird around me. Distant. Cold. A few of them stopped responding to my messages entirely. I asked one of them, Michelle, what was going on. She said she needed time to process some things she'd learned about me, that she wasn't sure we could be friends anymore. I was completely confused. What things? What had I done? Then another friend, David, actually told me. He said Lily had told the entire group about my mental health struggles, but she'd twisted everything, made it sound like I was unstable, unpredictable, potentially dangerous. She told them about a mistake I'd made in college, something I'd confessed to Lily years ago that I was deeply ashamed of, but she'd exaggerated it and removed all context to make me sound like a terrible person. She'd taken my trauma, my vulnerabilities, everything I'd trusted her with, and weaponized it all against me. She painted me as manipulative, as someone who played victim to control people, as someone they all needed to protect themselves from, and they believed her, every single one of them. I was ostracized overnight. People I'd known for years blocked me on everything. Group chats I'd been part of went silent, and I realized I'd been removed. Invitations to events stopped coming. It was like I'd been erased from the friend group completely. I tried to defend myself, tried to explain to a few people what actually happened, give context to the things Lily had shared. But she'd gotten to them first, and she'd been convincing. They'd already made up their minds about who I was based on her version of events. I spent weeks feeling absolutely gutted, questioning everything about myself, wondering if maybe I was the problem, if the things she'd said were somehow true, even though I knew they weren't. It was psychological warfare, and it was working. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found out Lily had also been telling people I'd been obsessed with her, that our friendship had been unhealthy, that she'd been trying to distance herself from me for months because I was too clingy and dependent. None of that was true. If anything, I'd been the one always accommodating her schedule, always being flexible when she cancelled, always being understanding when she needed space. She'd rewritten our entire friendship to make herself the victim and me the villain, and everyone bought it. I was angry, more angry than I'd ever been in my life, but I didn't know what to do with it. Going to each person individually to defend myself clearly wasn't working. Trying to tell my side of the story just made me look defensive and unstable, exactly like she'd said I was. Then I remembered something important. Lily had confided in me too, about a lot of things, things she probably didn't want anyone else to know. She'd told me about cheating on her boyfriend Marcus, not once, multiple times over the course of their 2-year relationship. She'd laughed about it, said he was too trusting, too naive to ever suspect. She'd told me names, dates, details. She'd also told me about lying on her resume to get her current job. She'd claimed to have a graduate degree she didn't actually have, forged some documents, talked her way through the interview. The job required that specific credential, and she absolutely did not have it. And there were the smaller things, stealing from former roommates, things she justified because they'd annoyed her. Lying to mutual friends about various things to manipulate situations in her favor. She'd confessed it all to me over the years, trusting that I'd keep her secrets the same way she was supposed to keep mine. I'd kept quiet out of loyalty, because that's what friends do. You don't weaponize someone's confessions. You don't betray trust like that. But she'd already done exactly that to me. She'd broken every rule of friendship. Why was I still playing by them? I spent a few days gathering everything I needed. Screenshots of old text conversations where she'd admitted to cheating on Marcus. Messages where she'd bragged about fooling her employer. Conversations where she'd casually mentioned stealing from people. I had years of receipts because I'd never thought to delete our messages. Why would I? She was my best friend. Then I did something calculated. I created a group chat with everyone she'd turned against me. The same people who'd blocked me, who believed her lies, who'd cut me out without even hearing my side. I didn't say much. Just posted the screenshots and wrote one message. Since we're apparently sharing private confessions now, I thought you should know what Lily's been hiding. The response was immediate. People started reading through the messages, seeing Lily's own words admitting to things they'd had no idea about. Marcus, who was in the group, was devastated. He'd had no clue about the cheating. Seeing it spelled out in her own messages, her laughing about how easy it was to fool him, destroyed him. Others were horrified by the lying and manipulation she'd casually admitted to. The stealing, the scheming, the way she talked about people behind their backs. They were seeing a side of Lily they'd never seen before, and it was ugly. Here's where it gets absurd. Marcus forwarded the cheating evidence to Lily's current boyfriend, who she'd started dating a few months ago. He broke up with her immediately. Someone else, I still don't know who, sent the information about her fake credentials to her employer's HR department. They launched an investigation. Lily tried to do damage control, claim the screenshots were fake or taken out of context, that I'd manipulated her into saying those things. But the timestamps were there. The context was clear. These were her own words, her own confessions, undoctored and undeniable. Her job fired her within 2 weeks after confirming she didn't actually have the degree she'd claimed. Credential fraud is apparently a pretty big deal. Marcus told everyone he knew about the cheating. Her new boyfriend wanted nothing to do with her. The friend group completely fractured. Some of them reached out to me afterward. Apologized for believing Lily without question, for cutting me out without hearing my side. Said they understood now that she was the manipulative one, not me. I appreciated the apologies, but honestly, I was done. These were people who'd known me for years and believed the worst about me based on one person's word. They discarded me without a second thought. The fact that they only came back after seeing Lily's dirt didn't make me feel better. It just confirmed that their loyalty was conditional and easily swayed. I'd already started building a new social circle anyway. People I'd met through hobbies and work who didn't know Lily, who didn't know that whole toxic dynamic. Friends who actually valued communication and trust. Lily tried to reach out once, a few months later, sent me a long message about how I destroyed her life, how what I did was cruel and vindictive. She said we'd both made mistakes, but mine was worse because I'd done it out of revenge rather than hurt. I didn't respond, but I thought about it a lot. She'd weaponized my trauma and vulnerabilities to isolate me from everyone I knew. She'd deliberately twisted my confessions to make me seem dangerous and unstable. And when I responded by sharing her own words, her own admissions, suddenly I was the cruel one. The mental gymnastics were impressive. The difference between what she did and what I did was simple. She lied and manipulated. I told the truth. She twisted my confessions into weapons. I simply let her own words speak for themselves. If that destroyed her life, it was because her life was built on lies and manipulation in the first place. I don't regret it. Maybe that makes me vindictive. Maybe I should have taken the high road, let karma handle it naturally. But I'd tried being the bigger person, and it got me ostracized and gaslit. Sometimes you have to fight back with the truth. Lily lost her job, her relationship, most of her friends. The friend group never really recovered. Some people stayed loyal to her, most scattered to other social circles. I heard she moved to a different city a year later, started over somewhere nobody knew her history. As for me, I'm more careful now about who I trust. Not everyone deserves to know your vulnerabilities. Not everyone will protect your secrets the way you protect theirs. Some people see confession as ammunition, not intimacy. I have better friends now, smaller circle, deeper trust, and none of them know Lily ever existed. Speaking of people hiding who they really are, this next person built an entire false life that came crashing down in spectacular fashion. I'd been dating Chris for about a year when I started noticing things didn't quite add up. Little inconsistencies that I'd brush off at first because I wanted to believe him, because I loved him, because questioning someone you're building a life with feels paranoid and unfair. But the inconsistencies kept piling up. He'd mentioned going to Yale multiple times. It was part of his whole backstory, this impressive educational pedigree that made him seem accomplished and driven. But whenever I'd ask follow-up questions about his time there, he'd get vague, couldn't name any professors, didn't remember specific buildings or campus traditions that anyone who actually attended would know. When I mentioned a friend of mine who went to Yale and suggested they might have overlapped, he suddenly changed the subject. Then there were his military service stories. Chris claimed he'd served in the Marines for 4 years, had done a tour overseas, seen combat. It was this whole identity he'd built around being a veteran. Except the details changed. First he'd been in Afghanistan, then Iraq, then back to Afghanistan. The timeline didn't make sense. The terminology he used was off, like someone who'd learned about military life from movies rather than experience. His family situation was the biggest red flag. He'd told me his parents were dead, both of them car accident when he was in college. It was tragic and sad, and I'd felt so much sympathy for him, except he'd slip sometimes, mention his mom in present tense, talk about what his dad thought about something currently happening. When I'd pointed out, he'd say he misspoke, that he still thought of them in the present sometimes because grief was complicated. After about 10 months together, I couldn't ignore it anymore. The inconsistencies were too many, too obvious. Something was very wrong and I needed to know what. I hired a background check service, one of those comprehensive ones that digs into everything. Education records, employment history, criminal background, the works. I felt guilty doing it behind his back, like I was violating his privacy. But my gut was screaming that something was off, and I needed the truth. The report came back a week later, and I felt physically ill reading it. Nothing about Chris was real. His actual name was Derek Matheson. He'd never attended Yale or any 4-year university. He'd barely finished community college with a 2.3 GPA before dropping out. He'd never served in the military. Not the Marines, not any branch. Never enlisted, never deployed, never saw combat. His family wasn't dead. Both parents were alive and well, living in Ohio, and they had a restraining order against him for financial abuse. He'd apparently stolen from them repeatedly, maxed out credit cards in their names, forged checks. They'd finally had enough and legally barred him from contacting them. But that wasn't even the worst part. The report included a section on known aliases and previous addresses. Derek/Chris had done this before, multiple times. He'd had relationships with at least 3 other women under different names, with different fabricated backgrounds. Same pattern. Create an impressive persona, date someone for a while, then disappear before things got too serious, or before anyone could verify his stories. One of his previous identities claimed to be a doctor. Another said he was a successful entrepreneur. He'd been crafting elaborate fake lives for years, moving from city to city, woman to woman, always staying just ahead of anyone who might dig deep enough to find the truth. I sat there staring at the report, feeling like my entire relationship had been a hallucination. The man I'd fallen in love with didn't exist. Chris wasn't real. Derek was real, and Derek was a con artist with a restraining order and a pattern of deception spanning multiple states. I didn't confront him immediately. I needed to think, needed to process, needed to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to just ghost him the way he'd apparently ghosted other women. Disappear and let him wonder what happened. But that felt cowardly, and it wouldn't stop him from doing this to someone else. I contacted his ex-girlfriends through Facebook, found them through the addresses in the background report, tracked them down on social media, sent each of them a careful message explaining who I was and what I'd discovered, asking if they'd be willing to talk. 2 of them responded within hours. Both had similar stories. He'd lied about everything, created elaborate personas, borrowed money he never repaid, then vanished without explanation. One of them said she'd tried to file a police report, but was told there wasn't enough evidence of actual fraud since she'd given him the money willingly. The other said she'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone, felt stupid for being fooled so completely. We compared notes. The patterns were identical. The Yale story, the military service, the dead parents. He'd used the same lies with all of us, just changed the name and a few minor details. The audacity was genuinely breathtaking. I finally confronted him with the background report, printed the whole thing out, laid it on his kitchen table, and watched his face as he read it. He went pale, started stammering, tried to say it was a mistake, that the background check company had confused him with someone else, that Derek Matheson was a different person who happened to have a similar name. I cut him off and told him I'd already contacted his exes, that I knew about the pattern, that I had documentation of everything he'd lied about. There was no talking his way out of this. Then his whole demeanor changed. The charming, caring boyfriend act dropped completely. He got angry, said I had no right to invade his privacy like that, to dig into his past, called me paranoid and controlling, said if I'd just trusted him like a normal girlfriend, none of this would have been necessary. The gaslighting attempt was almost impressive in its boldness. He'd built an entire fake identity, lied about every major aspect of his life, and now he was trying to make me the bad guy for uncovering it. I left, took my things from his apartment, blocked his number, never looked back. But the 3 of us, his exes and me, we weren't done. We filed a police report together. Fraud, identity theft, financial crimes across multiple states. We pooled our evidence, our bank records showing money we'd lent him, screenshots of his lies, the background check report, everything. Turns out when you establish a pattern of this kind of behavior across state lines, prosecutors get interested. He was charged with fraud in 3 different states, wire fraud for the money transfers, identity theft for using false names, the restraining order violation for contacting his parents despite the court order. Last I heard, he took a plea deal to avoid trial, got sentenced to 18 months in prison plus restitution to his victims, which included his parents and all of us. I don't expect to ever see that money again. But honestly, I don't care. I just wanted him stopped. The whole experience left me with serious trust issues. I second-guess everything now. When I meet someone new, I find myself looking for inconsistencies, waiting for the lies to surface. I've probably sabotaged a few potentially good connections because I couldn't stop investigating, couldn't stop waiting for the other shoe to drop. My therapist says it's normal after what I went through, that it'll take time to rebuild the ability to trust at face value, that not everyone is running a con, But it's hard to believe that when you've seen how easily someone can fabricate an entire life, how convincingly they can lie to your face for a year straight. I think about all the moments I ignored my gut because I wanted to believe him. The times I noticed something off but talked myself out of being suspicious. The red flags I saw but dismissed because love is supposed to mean giving people the benefit of the doubt. Now I know better. Trust, yes, but verify. If something feels wrong, investigate. If stories don't match up, ask questions. If someone can't provide basic, verifiable information about major life claims, that's not you being paranoid. That's you being smart. Chris or Derek or whatever his real name actually is, taught me that some people are professional liars. They've practiced their stories, perfected their personas, learned exactly what to say to be believable. And the only defense against that is to pay attention to the details that don't quite fit. I heard through one of his other exes that he's been trying to rebuild online while serving his sentence, creating new social media profiles with yet another name, probably planning his next con for when he gets out. Some people never learn, they just get better at hiding. But at least now there's a record, a paper trail. If he tries this again with someone else and they do a background check, they'll find the arrests, the charges, the pattern. Maybe it'll save someone else from going through what we did. I'm dating again now cautiously, taking things slow, asking the uncomfortable questions early, verifying the big claims before I get too invested. It's not romantic, but it's necessary. And honestly, anyone who gets defensive about basic verification probably has something to hide anyway. The right person won't be offended by reasonable questions. They'll understand that trust is earned, not assumed, and they definitely won't have a secret past involving multiple fake identities and restraining orders. At least that deception happened in a relationship. Imagine your entire reputation getting destroyed by something that never even happened. My relationship with my girlfriend Emma ended on a Tuesday night. No warning, no real conversation, just her showing up at my apartment in tears, saying she couldn't believe I'd done this to her, that she'd trusted me, that we were over. I had no idea what she was talking about. I kept asking what happened, what I'd supposedly done. She just kept saying I knew exactly what I did, and she never wanted to see me again. I was completely blindsided. We'd been together for almost 2 years. Things were good. We just talked about moving in together, and suddenly she was ending it over something I apparently did, but had no memory or knowledge of. Her roommate finally told me the next day. There was a rumor going around that I'd cheated on Emma with her cousin Ashley at a party 2 weeks ago. A party I'd actually attended, which made the story more believable. The rumor was detailed and specific. Said I'd disappeared upstairs with Ashley for over an hour, that multiple people had seen us sneaking off together, that Ashley had been bragging about it afterward. None of it was true. I'd barely even talked to Ashley at that party. We'd said hello, made small talk for maybe 5 minutes in the kitchen, and that was it. I'd spent most of the night with Emma and our mutual friends. I certainly hadn't disappeared anywhere with anyone, but the story was so detailed, so specific, with supposed witnesses, that Emma believed it completely. Her whole family believed it. Ashley denied it, said she had no idea where this was coming from, but the damage was done. Emma's family thought we were both liars trying to cover it up. I tried everything to convince Emma it wasn't true. Showed her my phone, offered to take a lie detector test, asked her to talk to the people I'd actually been with at the party. She wouldn't listen. Said the evidence was too convincing, too many people had confirmed the story. She'd made up her mind. I was devastated, but I was also confused and increasingly angry. Someone had made this up. Someone had deliberately created a detailed false story that destroyed my relationship. And I needed to know who and why. I became a little obsessed with tracking down the source. I started asking people who'd heard the rumor where they'd heard it from. Each person pointed me to someone else. It was like following a trail of breadcrumbs backward through gossip chains. It took weeks. I talked to probably 15 different people, mapping out who told who and when. Some people were helpful, others thought I was being weird and obsessive, but I kept going because I needed to understand how this happened. Finally, I traced it back to one person, Vanessa, Emma's best friend since high school, the person Emma trusted more than anyone except maybe her own family. That felt wrong at first. Why would Vanessa destroy Emma's relationship? They were inseparable. Vanessa had been one of the first people Emma introduced me to when we started dating. She'd seemed happy for us, but then I started thinking about how Vanessa acted around Emma. Always a little too attentive, always finding reasons to touch her arm or sit close to her. The way she'd get quiet and withdrawn whenever Emma and I were affectionate in front of her. How she'd make little comments about how Emma could do better. How I wasn't good enough for her. I'd written it off as protective best friend behavior. Now I was wondering if it was something else entirely. I started digging deeper into Vanessa specifically, asked mutual friends about her, looked through old social media posts, tried to piece together a timeline, and that's when things started clicking into place. Vanessa had been in love with Emma, probably for years. Multiple people confirmed it once I asked directly. They said it was obvious to everyone except apparently Emma. Vanessa had never acted on it because Emma was straight, or at least had only ever dated men. But the feelings were clearly there, and I'd been in the way. A serious relationship that was getting more serious. Talk of moving in together. Vanessa must have seen her window closing. But that wasn't even the worst part. I found out through a friend of a friend that Vanessa had been talking about me behind my back for months, planting little seeds of doubt, telling Emma I seemed distant lately, that she'd heard I'd been flirting with other girls, small things that Emma had apparently brushed off, but that had created a foundation of suspicion. The cheating rumor wasn't random. It was the culmination of a months-long campaign to break us up. I needed proof, real proof, not just suspicions and circumstantial evidence. So I started looking at Vanessa's social media more carefully, her interactions with other people, anything that might show what she'd done. And I found it. In a semi-private Instagram story that she'd shared with close friends only, someone had screenshot it and it made its way to me. Vanessa talking about how she'd finally gotten rid of the dead weight and how Emma would see eventually that they were meant to be together. She'd literally admitted to breaking us up. I dug further, found text messages that a mutual friend shared with me where Vanessa had admitted to fabricating the cheating story. She talked about how she'd gotten a few people to back up the story, people who weren't even at the party but claimed they were. She'd coached them on details, made it seem credible and verified. She'd laughed about how easy it was to manipulate the situation, how Emma trusted her so completely that she never questioned the story, how I was finally out of the picture. Reading those messages made me physically sick. This person Emma trusted more than almost anyone had deliberately destroyed our relationship based on lies, and she was proud of it. I compiled everything, screenshots of the Instagram story, the text messages where she admitted what she'd done, testimony from people she'd recruited to lie about being witnesses, a timeline showing how she'd been planting doubts for months before the fake cheating story. Then I sent it all to Emma. No explanation, no commentary, just the evidence. She called me 3 hours later, crying, said she couldn't believe Vanessa would do this, that she felt betrayed and sick and stupid for not seeing it. She'd already confronted Vanessa, who'd apparently admitted everything once she realized Emma had proof. Emma asked if we could meet, if we could talk about fixing this. She said she was sorry for not believing me, for not even giving me a chance to defend myself. She said she wanted to make it right. I thought about it for a few days. Part of me wanted to say yes. I'd loved Emma. We'd had something good before all this happened, and it wasn't really her fault that she'd been manipulated by someone she trusted. But I kept coming back to one thing. She'd believed the rumor without even asking me about it first. She'd heard a story, no matter how detailed or seemingly credible, and immediately decided I was guilty. She hadn't given me the benefit of the doubt, hadn't trusted our relationship enough to at least have a conversation before ending things. The rumor didn't destroy our relationship. Vanessa's manipulation didn't destroy it. What destroyed it was Emma's willingness to believe the worst about me based on gossip. I told her I appreciated the apology, but I didn't want to get back together. That the trust was broken, not by the lie, but by her reaction to it. That I needed to be with someone who would at least ask my side before convicting me. She didn't take it well. Tried to convince me we could rebuild that trust. But I'd already made up my mind. As for Vanessa, her life imploded pretty spectacularly. Emma cut her off completely and told their entire friend group what had happened. Vanessa went from being the beloved best friend to a social pariah basically overnight. People were horrified by what she'd done. The manipulation, the lying, the calculated destruction of someone else's relationship. She lost almost all her friends. The ones who stayed were the type who probably would have helped her fabricate the story if she'd asked. Emma's family, who'd loved Vanessa like a daughter, wanted nothing to do with her. I heard she tried to apologize to me once through a mutual acquaintance. Said she'd been dealing with unrequited feelings and made terrible choices, that she regretted everything. I didn't respond. Her regret didn't undo the damage. It didn't give me back the relationship she'd destroyed, or the weeks I'd spent feeling betrayed and confused. The whole thing taught me something important about trust and verification, not in the paranoid sense where you suspect everyone of lying, but in the sense that if someone tells you something devastating about a person you love, maybe ask that person about it before burning everything down. Give them a chance to respond. Trust the relationship you've built, not just the most dramatic story. Emma and I don't talk anymore. Last I heard, she was dating someone new and being more careful about who she trusts. I hope she learned the same lesson I did. Vanessa apparently moved to a different city eventually. Fresh start where nobody knows what she did. I wonder if she tells her new friends about the time she destroyed someone's relationship because she was in love with a straight girl who'd never see her that way. Probably not. Some stories don't paint you in a great light. While that was personal sabotage, this next story takes workplace backstabbing to a whole new criminal level. I spent 6 months on this project. 6 months of late nights, weekend work, research, client meetings, revisions. It was a massive pitch for a client that could have completely changed the trajectory of my career. The kind of account that gets you promoted, that puts you on the map in the industry. I poured everything I had into it. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday morning. Wednesday night I was doing final reviews, making sure everything was perfect. I saved my work like I always did, backed it up to 2 separate drives like I always did, and went home to get some sleep before the biggest day of my professional life. Thursday morning, I got to the office 2 hours early, opened my laptop to run through the presentation one more time. The files were corrupted, all of them. I tried the backup drives, also corrupted. Every single version of 6 months of work was just gone. Destroyed, unrecoverable. I was in full panic mode. Called IT, they tried everything they could think of. Nothing worked. The presentation was in 3 hours and I had nothing. No slides, no data, no pitch. Just my notes and my memory, and absolutely no way to pull together 6 months of work in 3 hours. Jake from the team next to mine heard what was happening, came over looking concerned, asked if there was anything he could do to help. I was too panicked to think straight. He said he'd been working on a similar pitch for a different client, that maybe we could adapt his work to at least have something to present. What choice did I have? I said yes. We Frankensteined together a presentation using his materials and what I could remember from mine. It wasn't what I'd planned, it wasn't 6 months of carefully researched strategy, but it was something. The client loved it, absolutely loved it. Signed a contract on the spot. Our boss was thrilled, and Jake, helpful Jake who'd saved the day, got all the credit. He was the one who'd provided the materials. He was the one who'd stepped up in a crisis. Within 2 weeks, he got the promotion I'd been working toward. The corner office, the raise, the recognition. I was devastated. I tried to explain to my boss that most of the ideas had actually come from my original pitch, that Jake's contribution had just been the formatting and some surface-level content. But without my files, I had no proof. It was my word against his, and he had the successful presentation to back him up. I went back to my regular work, trying to move past it, trying not to be bitter. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The file corruption had been too complete, too thorough. It said they'd never seen anything like it. And the timing, the night before my biggest presentation, felt too convenient. Then I started noticing other things. Jake suddenly had expensive watches, not one, multiple. A new car showed up in the parking lot, something way above what our salary could afford. Designer clothes, fancy dinners he'd post about on social media. For someone at our level, his lifestyle didn't add up. I started paying attention, watching him, and I noticed he'd spend a lot of time on his phone during work hours, texting someone, always angling his screen away when people walked by. He'd take calls in conference rooms with the doors closed. Small things that individually meant nothing but together painted a picture. I couldn't let it go. Maybe it was the bitterness about losing my project. Maybe it was genuine suspicion. Either way, I decided to dig deeper. I went to our IT director privately, told him about my concerns, the convenient file corruption, Jake's sudden wealth, the secretive behavior. Asked if there was any way to monitor activity on my work computer to see if someone was accessing my files. He said normally that would be a privacy issue, but given the circumstances and the fact that it was my computer, we could set something up. We installed monitoring software that would log any external access to my files. I also started keeping detailed notes of Jake's behavior, his unexplained absences, his new purchases. I felt like a detective, but I needed to know if I was being paranoid or if something was actually wrong. It took about 3 weeks. Then the monitoring software caught something. Someone had remotely accessed my computer after hours and opened several files related to an upcoming client pitch. The access came from Jake's login credentials, but that wasn't even the worst part. The monitoring also caught him immediately after accessing my files, sending detailed information to an external email address. I had IT trace it. The email belonged to someone at our biggest competitor. Jake was feeding them our strategies, our client lists, our pitch materials. Everything we were working on, he was selling to the other side. I compiled everything I had. The monitoring logs showing his unauthorized access to my files, screenshots of him sending information to the competitor, photos of his expensive new lifestyle that didn't match his salary. I even found his social media check-ins at restaurants and events that coincided with known meetings between our competitor and clients we'd lost. I took it all to our legal department first. They were stunned. This wasn't just unethical, it was corporate espionage. They immediately brought in outside investigators to do a full audit. What they found was worse than I'd imagined. Jake had been taking bribes from our competitor for over a year. He'd been feeding them our client strategies, sabotaging our pitches, and getting paid handsomely for it. The corrupted files on my computer weren't an accident or a technical glitch. He'd deliberately destroyed my work, so I'd have to use his materials, which gave him plausible deniability for why he had a similar pitch ready to go. He'd stolen my 6 months of work, used the presentation I'd built to get himself promoted, all while selling out our company to the competition. The legal team contacted our clients, the ones whose strategies Jake had compromised. They were furious. One of them immediately filed a lawsuit. Our company fired Jake and filed criminal charges for corporate espionage and theft of trade secrets. Things went from bad to unhinged when the investigators dug into his finances. He'd made over $200,000 in the past year from his little side hustle. Money he'd spent on cars and watches and luxury vacations while sabotaging the careers of everyone around him. The competitor tried to claim they didn't know the information was stolen, that they'd thought Jake was a legitimate consultant, but the paper trail was too clear. Payments that coincided exactly with pitch dates, emails explicitly discussing stealing information. They ended up settling multiple lawsuits and firing several executives who'd been involved. Jake was arrested, actual handcuffs, perp walk out of the office, the whole thing. It was surreal watching someone I'd worked next to for 2 years get led away by police. The company offered me his position, the promotion he'd stolen from me, the corner office, everything. They also gave me back credit for the original pitch that had landed the big client, formally recognizing that the ideas had been mine all along. I took the job, moved into his office, threw out the expensive desk accessories he'd bought with his bribe money, and started fresh. Jake pleaded guilty to avoid a longer trial, got sentenced to 3 years in prison, and had to pay restitution to our company and the clients he'd betrayed. His career in the industry is over. Nobody will hire someone convicted of corporate espionage. I sometimes think about how close he came to getting away with it. If I hadn't noticed the lifestyle changes, if I hadn't been suspicious enough to investigate, he'd probably still be doing it. Sabotaging projects, stealing ideas, selling us out to the competition. The wild thing is, he had actual talent. He could have had a legitimate, successful career if he'd just done the work. But he wanted the shortcut, the easy money, the recognition without the effort, and it cost him everything. People ask me if I feel bad about what happened to him. I don't. He destroyed my work deliberately, stole 6 months of my life, and almost derailed my entire career. He betrayed our clients, our company, everyone who trusted him. He made his choices and now he's living with the consequences. I got my career back. He got a prison sentence. Seems fair to me. And if you think co-workers can be ruthless, wait until you see what happens when the boss is the one covering their tracks. I'd worked under Stephen for 3 years, and in that time I'd learned one very clear pattern. Whenever something went wrong in our department, I was the scapegoat. Missed deadline? My fault. Budget overrun? Obviously, I mismanaged resources. Client complaint? I must have dropped the ball on communication. It didn't matter if I'd been involved in the project or not. Stephen had this impressive ability to redirect blame downward, and I was his favorite target. The thing is, I'm good at my job. I keep detailed records, I meet my deadlines, I communicate clearly with clients. But none of that seemed to matter when Stephen was in damage control mode. He'd walk into meetings with upper management and somehow every problem traced back to decisions I'd supposedly made or tasks I'd supposedly neglected. I tried defending myself at first, showing emails that proved I'd flagged issues weeks before they became problems, presenting timelines that showed I'd met every deadline on my end. But Stephen was smooth. He'd acknowledge my documentation and then pivot to some vague claim about execution or follow-through or team coordination. Somehow, I always walked out of those meetings looking incompetent, while he looked like a patient manager dealing with a problematic employee. After 3 years of this, I was on the verge of being fired. My last performance review was brutal. Stephen had documented every supposed mistake from the past year, twisted every situation to make me look negligent or careless. HR was involved. I was given a performance improvement plan, which everyone knows is just the paperwork trail before termination. I was frustrated and scared and honestly starting to doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't as good at my job as I thought. Maybe I was the problem. Then I started noticing something odd. The projects Stephen blamed me for, the ones with budget issues or missed deadlines, they had some weird commonalities. Vendors I'd never heard of, invoices for services that didn't quite make sense, work that was supposedly outsourced but I'd never seen the deliverables. I started digging, not in an official capacity, just looking through files I had access to as part of my normal job duties. And the more I looked, the more things didn't add up. There were invoices from a company called Apex Solutions for consulting work on a project I'd managed. Except I'd never worked with anyone from Apex Solutions. I'd never even heard of them. The invoice was for $15,000. I checked the project files and there was no corresponding work product, no emails with anyone from that company, no contracts, nothing. I found another one, Summit Strategies, billed $22,000 for market analysis on a different project. Again, no actual deliverables, no emails, no evidence this company had done any work for us at all. I started compiling a list. Over the course of about 6 months of invoices I had access to, I found over a dozen fake vendor payments, all approved by Stephen, all for projects where something had conveniently gone wrong and I'd been blamed for the problems. That's when it clicked. Stephen wasn't just a bad boss who threw his employees under the bus. He was embezzling. He was creating fake vendor invoices, approving payments to companies that didn't actually do any work. And when the projects came in over budget or behind schedule because the work was never actually done, he blamed me for the failures. I felt sick, and then I felt angry. This man had nearly destroyed my career to cover up his own crimes. He'd made me doubt my abilities, question my competence, put my job in jeopardy, all to hide the fact that he was stealing from the company. I needed more proof. I started keeping meticulous records of everything, every project Stephen assigned me, every decision he made, every email, every budget item. I documented everything with timestamps and paper trails. Then I did some research on the vendor companies, Apex Solutions, Summit Strategies, all the others. I ran them through business databases, checked incorporation records. Most of them traced back to PO boxes or addresses that turned out to be UPS stores, shell companies, fake businesses set up specifically to funnel money out of our department. And here's where it gets absurd. I found out that several of these shell companies were registered to an LLC that listed Stephen's wife as the managing member. He wasn't even trying that hard to hide it. He'd just assumed nobody would bother to check. I compiled everything into a folder: invoice copies, project files showing no corresponding work, business registration documents, email trails showing Stephen's approvals, budget reports showing the discrepancies. I calculated that over the past 2 years, he'd embezzled at least $200,000, probably more if I'd had access to older records. I didn't go to HR. HR had already shown they were willing to believe Stephen over me. They'd put me on a performance improvement plan based on his lies. I didn't trust them to handle this properly. I went straight to corporate audit, bypassed the entire local chain of command, and sent everything directly to the company's internal investigation team with a detailed explanation of what I'd found. The response was fast. Within a week, auditors showed up at our office unannounced. They seized Stephen's computer, his files, started interviewing people. Stephen looked panicked but tried to play it cool, acted like this was routine. It wasn't routine. They were building a case, and I'd given them everything they needed to start. The investigation took about 6 weeks. During that time, Stephen tried to act normal, but I could see him unraveling. He'd have hushed phone conversations with what I assumed was his lawyer. He started being weirdly nice to me, probably hoping I didn't know anything or wouldn't cooperate with investigators. I cooperated fully. Gave them access to all my records, walked them through every fake invoice I'd found, explained the pattern of blame that Stephen had established. They found even more fraud than I'd uncovered. Turns out this had been going on for over 4 years, not just the 2 years I had access to. The total was closer to $400,000. Then came the breaking point. They arrested Stephen at his desk. Middle of a workday, 2 police officers walked into the office with corporate security and led him out in handcuffs. Fraud, embezzlement, theft. The charges kept coming. The whole office was in shock. Stephen had been there for almost a decade. He was well liked by upper management, seemed successful and competent. Nobody had suspected anything, except I had. Because I'd been paying attention to the details while everyone else was buying his performance. The company's legal team reached out to me a few days later. They wanted to discuss my situation, my performance improvement plan, the fact that I'd been on the verge of termination for problems that were actually caused by Stephen's embezzlement. They offered me 2 things. First, Stephen's position as department director. They needed someone who clearly paid attention to details and had integrity. Second, a settlement to avoid any potential wrongful termination lawsuit I might have filed. I took both. The settlement was generous, 6 figures. Acknowledgement that I'd been wrongly blamed and nearly fired for someone else's crimes. The promotion came with a significant raise and the authority to rebuild the department the right way. Stephen's criminal trial took about a year. He ended up pleading guilty to avoid a longer sentence. Got 4 years in prison and had to pay restitution, though the company will probably never recover most of the money. His wife divorced him before the trial even started. His reputation in the industry is completely destroyed. As for me, I've been running the department for 2 years now. I implemented new oversight procedures, multiple approval requirements for vendor payments, regular audits, the kind of systems that would have caught Stephen's scheme much earlier if they'd been in place before. I hired a whole new team, people who actually do the work instead of creating phantom vendors and blaming their staff for the fallout. Morale is better, productivity is up, and we haven't had a single case of someone being scapegoated for management's failures. Sometimes I think about those 3 years of being blamed for everything, of doubting myself and wondering if I was actually incompetent. It makes me angry all over again. Stephen didn't just steal money from the company, he stole my confidence, my peace of mind, nearly stole my entire career. But he underestimated one crucial thing. I'm thorough. I pay attention, I document everything, and when someone's lies become elaborate enough, eventually the details don't line up. You just have to be patient enough to find the gaps. The company put out an internal memo after everything came out, praised my diligence and integrity, used it as a teaching moment about the importance of speaking up when something doesn't seem right. Some of my former colleagues apologized for believing Stephen's narrative about me. I appreciated it, but it also made me realize how easily people accept the official story without questioning it. I don't blame them too much. Stephen was convincing. He had authority and charm and the trust of upper management. I was just the person he'd spent 3 years painting as incompetent. Of course they believed him over me, until the evidence became impossible to ignore. Sometimes the corruption goes beyond one person, sometimes it's the entire system protecting the wrong people. I did everything right. That's what makes this whole thing so infuriating. When my supervisor Mike started harassing me, I didn't just complain to coworkers or vent on social media. I documented everything, kept a detailed log of every inappropriate comment, Every time he stood too close, every instance of him messaging me after hours with things that had nothing to do with work. I saved screenshots, I noted dates and times, I had witnesses for some of the incidents. After 2 months of this, I reported it to HR, followed the exact protocol outlined in our employee handbook, submitted my documentation, requested a formal investigation, explained that the behavior was escalating and making it impossible for me to do my job effectively. The HR director, Patricia, assured me they took these matters very seriously, said they'd conduct a thorough investigation and get back to me within 2 weeks. She thanked me for coming forward and said I'd done the right thing. I felt relieved. I'd followed the process. The company would handle it. Mike would face consequences and I could finally work in peace. 2 weeks passed. Nothing. I followed up with Patricia. She said the investigation was ongoing, that these things take time, to be patient. Another 2 weeks. Still nothing. I sent another email. She responded that they were still gathering information. Meanwhile, Mike faced zero consequences. He was still my supervisor, still making comments, still creating a hostile work environment. Except now he seemed emboldened, like he knew I'd reported him and nothing had happened, so he was untouchable. Then the retaliation started. Suddenly, my work was never good enough. Projects I'd successfully handled for years were now full of problems, according to Mike. He started documenting these supposed performance issues, giving me negative feedback in writing, setting me up to fail. I reported the retaliation to HR. Patricia said she'd look into it. She didn't. The pattern was becoming clear. HR wasn't going to do anything. They'd taken my complaint, made the right noises about taking it seriously, and then buried it. I felt helpless. I'd done everything the system told me to do, and the system had failed me completely. I started looking for other jobs, but the retaliation from Mike was affecting my performance reviews, which would impact my references. I felt trapped. Then I had a thought. What if I wasn't the only one? What if there were other employees who'd filed complaints that went nowhere? I started carefully, casually asking around. Not directly, just mentioning in conversation with trusted coworkers that I'd had some issues with HR responsiveness, and people started talking. One person mentioned they'd reported wage theft and nothing happened. Another said they'd complained about discrimination and the investigation just disappeared. There were more, a lot more. I created an anonymous survey using a burner email account, posted it in some private employee social media groups, asked people to share their experiences with HR complaint processes, made it clear it was confidential and anonymous. The responses were devastating. Over 40 people responded in the first week. Stories of harassment, discrimination, hostile work environment, wage violations, safety concerns, all reported to HR, all supposedly investigated, all buried with no resolution, and the same names kept appearing. Patricia, the HR director, had personally handled most of these complaints. The pattern was impossible to ignore. She was systematically protecting managers while silencing employees who spoke up. But that wasn't even the worst part. Several people mentioned that when they'd followed up on their complaints, they were told there was no record of them ever filing anything. Documentation had disappeared, emails had been deleted. HR claimed the complaints never existed. Patricia wasn't just ignoring complaints, she was actively destroying evidence and gaslighting employees who tried to hold the company accountable. I compiled everything from the survey, organized it by type of complaint and date, noted the patterns. Then I contacted a labor attorney who specialized in employment discrimination and retaliation cases. She was horrified by what I showed her, said this was one of the most systematic patterns of HR corruption she'd seen. She agreed to take the case and started reaching out to the survey respondents who'd indicated they'd be willing to participate in legal action. 32 employees agreed to be part of a massive complaint to the EEOC. We had documentation, witness statements, the survey results showing the pattern, everything. The attorney also subpoenaed HR records, which revealed that Patricia had been deleting complaint files and emails for at least 3 years. The EEOC investigation was thorough and damning. They found that HR had systematically protected managers from accountability, retaliated against employees who complained, and destroyed evidence of misconduct. The company had created a culture where reporting problems was pointless at best and career suicide at worst. Here's where it gets absurd. During the investigation, they discovered Patricia had a side deal going with several managers. She'd bury complaints against them in exchange for favorable performance reviews and bonuses. She'd literally been getting paid to protect harassers and discriminators. The company's legal team realized they were looking at massive liability, multiple violations of federal employment law, evidence of conspiracy to suppress complaints, systematic retaliation against protected activity. They pushed for settlement. The final settlement was in the high six figures, distributed among the 32 employees who'd participated in the complaint. I got a significant portion as the primary complainant and the one who'd organized the evidence. But money wasn't the only outcome. The entire HR department was fired. Patricia, her deputy, the HR generalist who'd helped destroy records, all gone. The company brought in an outside firm to completely rebuild their HR processes and policies. My supervisor, Mike, was terminated. Turned out once HR was actually forced to investigate, they found multiple complaints against him going back years, all buried by Patricia. He was gone within a week of the new HR team taking over. The company also implemented new policies, anonymous reporting systems managed by third-party services, mandatory timelines for investigation completion, regular audits of HR complaint handling, protections against retaliation with actual enforcement mechanisms. I stayed for a few months after everything settled, mostly to make sure the changes were actually implemented and not just PR. Once I was satisfied that employees would actually be protected going forward, I left for a better company, one where HR actually does their job instead of covering for abusers. The whole experience changed how I think about workplace systems. I trusted that following the proper channels would lead to the proper outcome, that reporting through official processes meant someone would actually address the problem. I'd believed the employee handbook when it said the company had zero tolerance for harassment and retaliation. All of that was a lie. The system only worked if the people running it had integrity, and when those people were corrupt, the system became a weapon against the very employees it was supposed to protect. But I also learned that corrupt systems can be exposed, that patterns of abuse leave evidence, that employees have more power than they think when they organize and document and refuse to accept being silenced. Those 32 people who participated in the complaint, we didn't just get compensation for what we'd endured. We made sure the next employee who reports harassment won't be ignored. We made sure the next person who speaks up won't have their complaint deleted and be told it never happened. Patricia ended up facing her own legal consequences. Destroying federal employment records is a crime. She's dealing with that separately from what the company settled. Mike's career is over. Word spread in our industry about why he was terminated. Nobody wants to hire someone with a documented history of harassment and retaliation. The company survived. Barely. They lost a lot of good employees who left after realizing how badly the system had failed them. Their reputation took a hit, but at least now they have actual accountability measures instead of a HR department that existed solely to protect management. I sometimes hear from former co-workers who are still there. They say things are actually better now, that complaints get investigated, that employees aren't afraid to report problems anymore. It doesn't undo what happened, but at least something good came from it. Sweet dreams, everyone, and remember, the truth might take its time, but it always finds a way to the surface. These stories remind us that justice doesn't always come from the system. Sometimes it comes from people who refuse to stay silent. If you've made it this far through all these stories of revenge, redemption, and standing up for yourself, you're exactly the kind of person who makes this community amazing. Drop a comment and let me know which story hit hardest for you tonight. Until next time, sleep well, and may your own story never need this kind of ending.